Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili Gianarakos. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Yariv. I'm really happy to be back. Obviously, missed
Hell
last
yeah.
week due to some unfortunate power circumstances. But when you're in Canada and it's really windy, sometimes these things occur. But
Yeah.
surprisingly enough, we have a lot to really discuss, and it's more Flyers related centric news than anything. Getting prepared for this, we were thinking, okay, we're gonna have a lot to talk about in terms of playoffs, stuff like that. Maybe not really Flyers related, but just a lot of news really coming out the last 24 hours surrounding some significant pieces for the Flyers. So we're going to dive into that. It's going to be a fun one. How you doing, Yariv?
I'm doing well, dude. I'm doing a lot better today after today's news. And again, we'll take everything we talk about today with a grain of salt. But I agree, man. We got some real cool stuff to talk about today. And yeah, we'll end it with some NHL like playoff talk at the end. But we'll talk about everything Flyers because there's actually a good amount going on, and there's still stuff going on with the Phantoms. Did you have a chance to watch the Phantoms games? I probably should have asked you before we started recording.
Caught a bit of it, but
Okay.
didn't see the second game, but saw the final game.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
All right. Well, it was only two games.
yeah. So the final one then.
Okay. Okay. Got
I
it.
thought it was a
So,
3-game series. That's my mistake.
well, it was, but they won both games. I did get a chance to watch both games, so it's good enough that we have enough insight there. So we're not just speaking blindly like we are normally about the Phantoms. But yeah, we got a lot of good stuff to talk about. I'm pumped about that. It's funny that you missed. I don't know if you remember this, Vasily. You lost your power before the episode with Bill. And yes, we did end up recording with Bill, but if you remember when we were originally supposed to record with Bill, like the previous episode, he had a power outage that day. We couldn't record with him and
I
we had to
actually do
shift it to
remember
the
that.
following week. So,
Some funny programming
yeah,
stuff from us, but yeah.
yeah. Bill was laughing. Bill and I were laughing about it. And actually, that episode, Bill, we scheduled that prior to the schedule for the Phantoms coming out, and then the schedule for the Phantoms came out, and Bill had to cover the game, so I could only have him on for 30 minutes. But we'll get him back on with the two of us, and we'll have a better episode. I'm sure Bill will be more than happy to come back on. But the episode did well anyway, so I'm happy about it. All right. Before we get started, we'll go into the usual spiel here. Please remember to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Hit the notification bell for notifications. That is a humongous help for us. Is the best way to support us. We are inching towards 1,000. We're getting so close. I can like taste it. We're still over 100 subs away. But if you're listening to this and you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe. Again, remember Vasily and I go all off season long as well. We still have an episode every week. And again, if there's huge news, we'll do additional videos, kind of fill in between. We know that there's no Flyers in the off season, so we kind of jump on that. And it's a lot easier to record when you don't have to watch a game like every other night. So please make sure to do that. Also follow us on iTunes and Spotify as well. Give us a follow both places and give us a rating there. All of that is tremendously helpful. I did notice that went up. You guys are amazing. Thank you all so much. Anybody who's listening on there that didn't do that, please do that. Again, the best way to support us is just to follow us on there. We don't really ask for anything but that. Cool. And a shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Jim Steaks is, as I record this, is opening up in 2 days. So that's exciting for them. So make sure to check out Jim Steaks. Again, they'll be reopening on May 1st on 4th and South. Make sure to get yourself a cheesesteak. And also Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go there to challenge your insurance companies and make them, keep them honest. And Summit Public Adjusters will help you there. Okay, let's get into it. Let's get into the big piece of news. This is one we are probably way too goddamn excited about. Sorry for taking thy Lord's name in vain. I'm not even religious, but apologies for anybody who got offended. But let's just be real. We're all super excited. So today we'll give credit to Alexander Appleyard. He's the one who tweeted this out and kind of made this public to all of us. So I obviously it was going on. It comes from a Russian news source. So we're using Google Translate. But a really interesting piece of information. So first piece of information we got is that Michkov was kept off the under 25 team. There is one other player on that team that is his age at 19 years old. It's the goaltender. But he did not make that team, which is very odd considering he's most likely the best player on that team. And you kind of notice a pattern there where he wasn't, he didn't make SKA St. Petersburg, even though by the numbers this year, he probably would have been one of the best players on that team, and probably would have put up even more points than he did, and probably would have landed him within like the top 15, top 10 in points potentially if he would have been on one of those superior teams. Where instead he went back to Sochi. And then the huge news kind of came out today, at least publicly to us here in the United States, is the team's chairman, Alexander Medvedev, has has been quoted, and again I'll paraphrase. We'll let Vasili go through the article, the translation article. But the team's chairman pretty much said they have a great relationship with the Flyers, and that the Flyers have been very understanding. And you guys have heard me mention, on for those who've been following for a while, that when the Flyers work on a deal, it will be an amicable deal. They will not be trying to do anything illegal, anything shisty, nothing like that. He pretty much gives them credit for behaving in that way. We saw the success with Fedotov recently and getting him out of Russia. We saw Kolosov, again, not in Russia, Belarusian, but was a KHL player. The success back to back, bringing those guys over. And he pretty much talked about Matvei Michkov and the opportunity for him to come over to the Flyers early. He even mentioned that the decision could come as early as this summer. So before we dig into that and all the potential to kind of go around that, Vasili, I'll go to you.
Yeah, so I'll just read out the article here that came from matchtv.ru. We should note that this is a Google translated article that I'm reading
Yeah.
here, so it might not necessarily be 100% accurate in terms of the translation. Sometimes Google Translate can mess things up, but I will say that just based on everything we're seeing through the translation, it's just a really interesting situation with Michkov, and obviously a lot of moving parts involved. So let me dig into it here. Chairman of the board of directors of SKA, Alexander Medvedev, in an interview with Match TV, did not rule out the possibility that forward Matvei Michkov would go to the NHL Philadelphia Flyers this summer. Michkov, as everyone knows, was selected by the Flyers in the first round, 7th overall in the 2023 NHL draft. The first question for Medvedev in the interview is as follows. Matvei Michkov has a 2-year contract with SKA, but he really wants to go to Philadelphia. Will the club release him from St. Petersburg? And then Medvedev followed it up with this answer. I think it's better to leave like Ovechkin or Panarin when you have already established yourself in Russia and you are not going to North America to travel between the NHL and AHL. We must not forget that Matvei experienced a terrible tragedy, losing his father, who was also a mentor for him, being by his side all the time. It's hard to play psychologically, be it Sochi or Moscow, where everything reminds you of this loss. Maybe a change of environment will make it easier to adapt. The second question was change to St. Petersburg or Philadelphia. Avangard released Ivan Miroshnichenko in the same situation. So basically referencing the Miroshnichenko release that happened, and he signed with Minnesota just to end the NHL season. This is what Medvedev had to say about that. Unlike the situation with Ivan Fedotov, we are in contact with Philadelphia. The Flyers management does not even hide their desire for Matvei to come to them and try his hand at the NHL. But if you go earlier, then you need to have a clause in the contract that if Philadelphia is tempted to send him to the AHL, he will have the right to return to the KHL. But it's too early to talk about this because legally, Michkov is under a contract with SKA, and Philadelphia sent us their assurances that they would not commit any violations of contractual rights. The final question here is Nikolai Kovalenko has such a clause that he can return to the KHL by end of December if he is not given a chance in Colorado. So the question is referencing Nikolai Kovalenko, who was recently signed by the Avalanche, who has a similar out clause that Medvedev was referencing in the prior question. And here's Medvedev's response to that. He said, this is a fairly common move, and there's nothing terrible about it. But still, for a mask wearer to go to the NHL, you can try, of course. But how many cases were there where the guy didn't play? There are more than a dozen such names. They left early and were unable to open up, and then we returned them to Russia. We didn't even play them at home. We understand that Matvei is a great talent. This is not even worth discussing. I think we will talk about all the options first of all with him, and we will also talk with the leaders of Philadelphia with whom we have a very good relations. There is understanding, and you will be patient. I think the decision on Michkov will be no later than the end of June, Medvedev told Match TV. So as you can see, just like reading the translation, it's not 100% accurate. Like some of the sentences are a little broken up just with the Russian to English, but it is really interesting, obviously, to see what's going on with the Michkov situation. Like just hearing that and kind of going through the article, Yariv, what are your thoughts on what we're looking at and kind of what was brought to the forefront today regarding Michkov?
Well, you know what I really liked about the article, that they talk about, like and again, some of it might be masked by we know the tenuous relationship between him and his somewhat coach, Roman Rottenberg, who's now the coach of the under 25 team as well. They kind of talk about how he's having a tough time, and it does kind of seem like they have his better interest in mind, talking about how they want a clause where he does not end up in the AHL. I think that is completely fair. And I think that's one the Flyers would completely agree to be
Yeah.
honest with you, because I don't think they really care if he plays in the AHL or not. That's not why they would bring him over. Having said that, the likelihood of him not playing in the NHL almost slim to none. Look at the players of like Fantilli, Carlson, obviously Connor Bedard, and Zach Benson, right? Like these guys clearly fit in the NHL, and arguably he's better than everybody but Bedard in that group. This is a lot of it is speculation, but looks like the signs are that he probably can compete with Bedard, at least in the skill level department. I mean, he did, as they were kind of growing up together, playing against each other in tournaments. He was one of those elite talents that kind of drove the team. I was actually rewatching highlights from the tournament they played against each other, and it was essentially the Bedard versus Michkov show. So I don't think that would end up being the case, but I gotta say, I love that that it is much more amicable than all of the bullshit we hear on Twitter. Like you heard that bullshit news story about the passports, which honestly I paid that almost no mind whatsoever. People were writing articles about it. I was like, this is not news. This is clearly not confirmed. I was like, this is another one of those bullshit scare tactics where this is really how a lot of things are done, and they're done amicably. Like these are businessmen, right? Like they're not going into it trying to steal from each other. This isn't Russian warfare versus, it's not US versus USSR, like political
This is
America.
hockey, right? Like these are hockey guys
Dealing with
talking
kids.
with each other. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Dealing
obviously
with,
dealing with kids, like you said, in
yeah,
terms of
or
Michkov
young
and
men,
prospects.
right?
Yeah.
Like look how the Fedotov situation, like what about that tells you that the Flyers did not approach that situation with delicacy? Like they obviously, with a delicate touch, well, not delicacy. What about that situation said non-amicable, right? Like outside of what happened from the Russian government, which I get everybody's fear, we don't know what kind of agreement he had for military service. We don't know why that happened. I mean, to us, it is freaky. It's scary. I don't like Russia's government. I don't trust them. But, you look at how things worked out in the end, the fact he was able to come over here, that, like people saw that as an impossibility, but clearly deals can be made. And there are other Russian players from the KHL that have made deals. So it shows that things are not completely broken. What are your thoughts? I'm talking a lot.
Yeah, it's really interesting, obviously, because at least my initial thought process in terms of Michkov was, I didn't think there was really any chances of him potentially coming this season, and my thought process there was, okay, he's gotten loaned to Sochi the last two seasons. Chances are he's going to need to at least get in one season with Scott before they agree to release him potentially early. So I was thinking maybe 2025, 26 would have been the year. But obviously this article changes the whole outlook and really
You mean
changes
24, 25? Like
not well
after oh, okay. I
yeah,
see what you're saying. I see what you're
yeah,
saying.
so two
Sorry.
seasons from now
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
versus next season.
You're right. My bad.
But yeah, so I think when you look at it and just look at kind of what's going on here with Michkov, really it's I think proponent of Briere kind of acting in a manner that isn't really like shaking the bush or kind of troubling the relationship between Ska and between the Flyers. Like you see in the article that Medvedev mentions that the Flyers and Ska have a good relationship. And you also see that it was mentioned that the Flyers will legally respect Mitchov's contract. Like they stated to Ska that Philadelphia sent their assurances that they would not commit any violations of Mitchkov's contractual rights. So I think the first aspect of it all is the fact that the Flyers are respecting the contract. They're not trying to meddle behind Ska's back. They're not trying to like, get Michkov to say, hey, okay, like we want to force your hand and kind of force Ska to maybe release you. It doesn't seem like anything like that is
Right.
happening. And I think Scott takes that into consideration and says, look at how we're dealing with Philadelphia, right? They're not forcing our hand. You're dealing with, Russian oligarchs like Roman Rottenberg and, Ska is, a team that's, definitely involved in all these, not like political situations, but there's obviously situations where they might want to, maybe keep Michkov for their own benefits. But I think Philadelphia not rocking the boat is kind of showing that, hey, we can, trust what they're doing. We can kind of take their word for it. And maybe that does open things up to further conversations, right?
You know what
To releasing Michkov earlier than expected here.
and you know what I just thought about? And again, I don't think they're like completely related because just jumping off of what you just said, the deal that the Flyers worked out with Fedotov, like I think in Russia's mind, that was a really fair deal, right? They waited patiently, they pulled him
Yeah.
over here, they didn't horse around with him, they didn't undercut him on a contract, they gave him what he wanted. And then you can tell that statement that they're making, it's like you can tell they don't
We
want their
respect the
top.
Russian players. Yeah.
Well, I think they also don't want their top prospect like embarrassed, right? It's happened with some guys like Yakupov, right? Where like these guys come here and then they're kind of thrown back to Russia as like, oh, you're no good. They don't want to see that happen
Yeah.
to Michkov, right? Like this is a bright young star for their program. And
Well,
go good.
sorry, Yariv. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I think that the way they handled the Fedotov situation gives them good grace almost in a sense for how this situation might go because they didn't even get involved, right? It was mainly the double IHF and the KHL that had their battle over like what was happening with Fedotov and allowing him to play and all those, legal types of restrictions that was surrounding what was going on because they obviously, the IHF fined him and so on and so forth, right? So I think the Flyers not even getting involved there in the first place. The KHL realizes, hey, okay, they don't really have their own interests in mind. These are our players, they're KHL Russian property, and the Flyers are going to let things kind of play out, their course how they should.
Right.
And I think if the Flyers would have meddled and gotten involved, it might be a totally different scenario here.
Yeah.
Because it shows that that level of respect really isn't there. That it's almost like, oh, we're this NHL team, we're going to do whatever we want. And I don't think the Russian teams really take highly to that type of behavior. Like they want the same respect as another NHL organization would get from the Flyers, right?
Yeah. And honestly, I think that's a humongous element of it to your point. I think that if you look at the way Russian culture is, and again, I my father was born in Moldova. I'm not necessarily Russian, but he was from the USSR. I do have a lot of, I guess, Russian ties in some kind of way, even though I'm like majority Israeli and American. But I've been around Russian culture. It's not one that like takes lightly to being disrespected, right?
Yeah.
So it is one of those things where always had to be amicable, which is why I always said that. I was like, you have to pay, you have to work out a deal with them. You're not going to, I know people were joking online about smuggling him out of the country, but like the idea of getting one off on Russia was never on the table. But deals can always be made. And that's what, I got to say, like, this is just the continuation of Danny Briere being that uh, understated, sneaky, aggressive guy that we really thought. I mean, that's what we were saying about him when we first brought him in here, is that he is aggressive. And while I don't think this statement came out of nowhere, too. Like,
Yeah.
I think the Flyers have been talking to them consistently, being like, you know, obviously it's not a problem. You let us know, but I think they were going to ask. And if he doesn't come this year, what I do think it gives me hope is that he will probably break the contract early regardless, and then he won't make it all the way to the end of this contract anyway. So even if he doesn't come this summer, I would imagine he probably is coming next summer, right? Because he really just wanted that opportunity to play for Scott. And if that opportunity is not there and they're not crazy, they're watching what Rottenberg is doing to him. And just so people have perspective, so I have these stats pulled up for Sochi, HK Sochi, the team he played majority of his games for. Okay. He had a 0.872 point per game on his team. Outside of one guy, Boma Rendulik, who's 31 years old and played 16 games. He had 15 points in 16 games for the team. Again, I don't really know his story. Michkov leads all players by a significant margin in point per game. He is the only one in that group who is 19 years old. The other guys are 26, 26, 30, 29, 31, 26, 20, 21 is the at a .408. Like if you look at what this guy is doing, he is one of the best players in that league already at 19 years old. He is their Connor Bedard. So like put that in perspective and imagine that a coach here didn't want Connor Bedard on the Chicago Blackhawks. Like think about that. And yeah, the Blackhawks are really bad and all that, but so put it in perspective with somebody like I don't know, Tampa Bay even or Detroit, right? It's like Detroit not wanting their best prospect on the team. Like who does those decisions? There's clearly some kind of issue here going through, and I don't think it's just Russian culture issue. And I think Demidov might fall under this camp as well.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. Like, I think the respect factor, Yariv, is a huge component of this. Like
Mhm.
the fact that Briere showed initial respect to the KHL and what happened with the whole Fedotov situation, I think that gives him extra good grace going into this Michkov kind of negotiation where the Flyers obviously seem to be more involved here than they were with Fedotov, which is stated in the match.ru art or match TV article there. But another component too, like that was mentioned in the article, obviously, is the AHL clause. I think the Flyers, like you stated, they will have no problems, putting a clause like that into a deal if he was to come over early, because I don't see any situation where Michkov plays in the AHL at all,
And
really.
if he is going to be in the AHL, okay, fine, go
Go
home.
back to Russia. Yeah. It's to
Fine.
be honest, the KHL
That's
might
not
be a
why we
better
need him.
league anyhow. So
Well, that's not why we need him here. I mean, look, it would be nice to have him on the Phantoms destroying every team in the AHL, as he develops. But for one, he's too
yeah.
good for that. Two, that's not why we would want him over here aggressively. If he was just going to be in the AHL, what's the difference? It's like letting a player develop in a league. And if he's playing against men, that's just as good as playing in the AHL in a lot of ways. I mean, the leagues are very comparable. The AHL and the KHL are like pretty much the same, with KHL having the slight edge in talent. So, it's like I don't really see a downside here to the Flyers. I'm really hoping this deal works out. And you know what I think, to your point again, where you talk about the respect factor, I think the way that Briere and Jonesy have approached this season and this rebuild, right? Stating things as a rebuild publicly, which again, it's a marketing statement. Say what it is you will, you it's a marketing statement, but it was a smart one, right? You set up the expectations, you set up the expectation with Michkov. You never told your fans we're going to get him here early. That Jonesy hinted at it publicly that look, they're open to it, and I think that kind of opened to the fact that they were having
Any team
conversations.
would be right in that situation.
Right, but you don't. This is again, I talk about it all the time how important being not desperate and having leverage. You have leverage over your fan base that if you do bring him over, that is exceeding expectations. Not, hey, we're going to be aggressive and we're going to be good next year. Then all of a sudden, the expectations to get Michkov over, all of a sudden we start talking about, well, he said he's going to be good next year. How are we going to be good next year? You bring over the best prospect in the organization that can immediately make a large NHL impact. They didn't do any of that. So like the pressure to get these guys over here is also not there. Same with Kolosov, same with
Yeah.
Fedotov, any of these young guys.
It's almost just seeing what unfolds, like a wait and see. Like we're not going to make any promises, but hey, if this does happen, look at how it can benefit the team. Obviously, Michkov, if he came over, could arguably be maybe even the best player on the Flyers. Just entering as a rookie, it totally has the potential for that. Last piece, at least for me, on Michkov, and I think this is kind of the crux of it all here with the whole situation, is his relationship with Roman Rottenberg. We know that he scratched him to begin the season with SKA, and then eventually that led to him being loaned to HC Sochi. Despite the fact that he had a productive preseason, I'd imagine that relationship probably has not been mended at this point. I mean, we're just speculating, but just the fact that Michkov did not make that under 25 team that Rottenberg also
Who's
coaches
who's
here.
part of he's one of your players.
Exactly, right? So you would think that he would want to get familiar with one of his own or potentially even probably top prospects, obviously, that he could have playing for him next season with SKA, but not the case. So I just think with him not making that team and everything that happened last season in the KHL with him getting loaned, I think that could be a real factor to all this where it might not be like Ska wanting to get rid of him so much as the player saying, hey, like, I don't know if we can make this relationship work because there's obviously seems to be something wrong between the two of them. We're not aware of what it is because we're not in the rooms or really know what's happening, but there seems to be a disconnect between Rottenberg and Michkov for whatever reason. And my thought process is that if he is unable to play for Ska this season and they're, let's say, you know, goes into training camp and they're thinking, well, we're going to loan you again, I would not be surprised to see him try to work something out with his agent, work something out with Ska where it's like, hey, if you're going to loan me again, just let me go because I don't want to play on this, you know, bottom feeder team again. Like, just let me go to the NHL and kind of do what I want with my career here.
Yeah.
Who knows how it's going to go, but I mean, that's the tea leaves that I'm kind of seeing where the Rottenberg relationship with Michkov might be the cause of all of this and potentially all of it happening a little earlier than expected for the Flyers in
Yeah.
regards to getting him over here. So
I guess theoretically they could try to loan him to somebody else. I mean, he's been 2 years for Sochi already. So like it's not I'm not saying he's a vet by any stretch, but like what more do you want from the guy?
yeah.
You know, like
But
what
I think
more
it's
do you want
also
him to do?
Yariv, I think it's also a sense of they're loaning him to Sochi because they know that team is shit and that it's not going to impact them later down the road. If they loan him to a competitor and then he comes back in the
Great
playoffs
point.
and bites you in the ass and scores all these goals against you, you look like an idiot as the manager of the
Yeah.
team, right?
And
So
and in those European leagues, like there is it's not like the NHL where all teams have, you know, at least outside of Arizona, have like the same standard. You know, they're a lot poorer of the organization. So like he's not
which
living
for
the
example is
glamorous
Sochi,
life,
right?
right? Like Ska or Siska or you know, he wouldn't be living that like prime, you know, he's kind of being just it's like the Flyers loaning a player out to not necessarily Arizona, but you know, it's like them loaning them out to Columbus
Yeah.
while we have
Well,
other guys in Philly
it's like
and struggling to
imagine
make the
it's
playoffs.
like being an okay, imagine being an NHL player, you know, riding on private jets and getting luxury hotel accommodations every night and then getting sent down to the AHL and now you're riding the bus to your
Yeah.
next game, right? It's the same.
When you're good enough to already be in the NHL.
Yeah.
It's even different than that because you're playing against them too. Like and there are a couple games where he like embarrassed that team,
And
which
I'm sure that
obviously
didn't sit well with Rottenberg either,
right.
most
It's
likely.
like,
So
dude, grow up, man. Look, I don't know the guy Rottenberg, but this is not. It's almost. It's so funny because Michkov and Gauthier seem to be such opposite directions. Where like Michkov is like, "Hey, I'll do what you guys want. Hey, I'll work my ass off regardless.
I'll
Hey,
try
I'll
to
keep
play
my,
center for you. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
I'll do whatever you ask me to do. I just want to play for your team." And they're like, "Nah." And we're like, "Hey, Gautier, we'll do whatever you want." And he's like, "Nah, I don't even want to talk to you." It's like literally like Rottenberg is to Gautier, you know, and the Flyers are to Michkov. And it's another one of those things that I was thinking about. It's like Michkov's misfortune and our misfortune just keep coming together. It almost feels like hockey fate, like the hockey gods at work
Yeah.
and like they won him here. And again, look, this could all not happen. We could be getting excited about absolutely nothing, but this is the closest thing. And again, we don't really even know Russian sources. You know, all of this should be taken with a grain of salt. I'm excited about it. Vasili's excited about it, but like everything should be taken with a grain of salt. But it is the closest we have seen to this and quicker than we even anticipated. They're not even talking about next season. And you know, I was thinking about Rottenberg, and I know this is going to come up. You absolutely know this is going to come up, Vasily. How is John Tortorella going to treat Michkov? And the one thing I just want to say to people to remind themselves as you're thinking about this, for some reason, Tortorella knows who Michkov is. He doesn't know who any of the young players are who don't play on his team. So if you don't think, and I do think back to what he said, that I am preparing this team for when the Mad Russian comes over, when he gave him a nickname, right? Or
Yeah.
at least the team has a nickname for him. We don't know if he initially came up with that. But there clearly is a thought in his mind too that this kid is something special and that he is somebody he's going to insert in his lineup. And look, you can say he doesn't treat young players well. Then well, what do you do with Tyson Forrester, a guy who did everything he asked him to do? From everything I see from Michkov, he is that guy and that caliber. Like I have not seen he has not complained public. Like he easily could have complained publicly, diminished Ska, talked about the coach, not a single word.
Which is a good sign, obviously, from his perspective, just showing the character level. Ultimately, I think, I mean, it's going to be a wait and see situation, but at least from the article, it looks like we're going to get some news soon on Michkov's future, just in terms of okay, where is he going to land? If for some reason, he stays in the KHL, which probably is the likeliest scenario at this point. Um, I would imagine he's going to be playing for SKA next season. I feel like if there's any chance of him getting loaned to another team, he will end up coming here. That's my thought process on it, just because at least from the way it seems, it looks like that's kind of the next goal for him. Like, what else is there to do in the KHL now? I'm scoring at a point per game pace for my age, which is breaking records,
Yeah.
things like that. Like, next thing is to play for one of the top teams in the league and prove I can be a top player on a top team, right? And if you
Yeah.
can't do that at the KHL level, then what else is there left for him really to do there? So
Yeah, and if you look at the amount that he'll make, again, there will be signing bonuses, including as in his deal, which will bring him most likely above $1 million a year, because you can do that, and he is an elite talent, so he will get that. If you look at the amount that he makes, I think in total, what I think I calculated at like $3.5 million is his contract with SKA, which is a lot of money for them. If you look at the contract that he get here, most likely he would sign a 2-year ELC, not a 3-year. He
yeah.
won't get the standard contract because he already was out there 1 year. So that will cover the 2 years of that contract, and then he can go and get a larger contract after that from the
Plus the
Flyers. So,
bonuses he could hit, which I mean,
right. So you can make up that money that he's losing because he'd have to walk away from a contract. So you'd have to kind of compensate him, and that can compensate the contract and more. And he probably will hit those bonuses. And if you look at the way they handled the Fedotov, like nobody's going to complain if Michkov's making $3.5 million a year as a rookie. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to hear anything. Like people might be
especially if
shocked.
he's close to or your leading scorer for that money, which
Right.
is a high possibility just looking at the way he's playing in the KHL. But
Yeah.
it's going to be really interesting, and we'll have to keep an eye out. Apparently, we will receive word here based on what the article said near the end of June. So it's coming up, right? Only really a month, 2 months away. So
Yeah. So when the Flyers end up moving up in the lottery draft and then have Matvei Michkov coming over, the league can speak a little differently about us. It's gonna be a 1-2 punch. We're gonna get an elite prospect, and then Michkov's gonna come over, and we can all forget about Cutter Gautier's big mouth, or lack of mouth, or whatever. But I think this organization really needs that. And after the news with Gauthier, and then having to wait 2 years more for Michkov, this would be a humongous win for the organization in general. It's the best way to move forward, and it takes the pressure off of Jamie Drysdale, like in the short term, to have to be that guy now because you have Michkov to distract everybody with, who will put the
yeah,
pressure on him. All right, so let's move on. We talked a lot about Michkov, but I could talk about him all day. So this was just something I was kind of thinking about, and this more coming out of the news. There's kind of a combined news story here. So, we look at what's going on with Toronto. Toronto right now is up against the walls. You are in Toronto. You feel this even more than I do. But even if you follow the NHL, Toronto is always at the top of the news, like beyond the Flyers. Just every little thing that happens there. You pretty much have Mitch Marner throwing down his gloves. Again, it looks like Toronto, barring, I guess, a turnaround, which is possible still, looks like there's a good chance they're going to be eliminated in the first round again to the Boston Bruins. And, Sheldon Keefe is going to be coming under the knife. There's a good chance he's probably not going to survive as coach of that team. And I don't think he should. You got to find the right coach. You really do. And it can be huge. And then you look subsequently at the firing of Dave Hackstall, which kind of happened back to back. There's all these firings, but the one thing that I want to take away from that, and I looked at that bench reaction of Marner, of Matthews, and then what William Nylander was saying to Mitch Marner, which he essentially looked at him. He's like, "Yo, this is not juniors, bro. Stop being a baby." And then you see Marner kind of throw his gloves. We think about Torts, and I gotta say, look, it's hard for me to just always pick the coach. But there is something about Tortorella where I do believe him. And you look at the way he was talking about this team, about pushing them and pushing them and pushing them, and the aggressiveness of it all. And I look at that and I'm like, dude, I think the guy is right. Like maybe it makes people uncomfortable. maybe makes us uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, look at the teams that make it. Look how hard it is to win in the playoffs, and how in those moments you watch the three best players on that team, three elite players, one of which is a franchise generational talent in Marner, and how they just losing it on in front of everybody. The three of them are just heads down, like you didn't see that from the Flyers this year. Tortorella will not allow them to behave that way. He will put the attention on him in that press. He'll just start a fight with a media person, and it might make people uncomfortable. But I want to hear what you have to say about this, Vasili. But like, it makes me feel like we might not understand it at all the time, why he makes the decisions he makes. But it does seem like his way of coaching is in those moments. You never see that. You never see that argument on the bench between the players. His coaching style does not allow for that, right? And if you were going to be like that, a la Provorov, which we've heard rumors about, how he would blame other people, stuff like that. I don't know about Kevin Hayes specifics, little details like that, but he must have seen something in those guys to be like, in those really tough moments, they were not who I thought they would be. Where if you look at a guy like Travis Konechny, he is exactly, he behaves like he might be angry and all that, but he's kind of Giroux-like in that anger, where he tries too hard, he takes too much on his back. That's not necessarily a downside. Maybe a downside to the individual player, not a downside to the team from a leadership standpoint. What do you think? What do you think about like that thought process there? And then we could talk a little bit about Hackstall getting fired too, but I don't know if that's all his fault.
Yeah, like when you look at what's happening with the Leafs and just the way that they're reacting, especially too after being in these situations year after year, obviously it's like a troubling trend. And I think it does go back to, not to say coaching in a sense, but just the way that a player needs to understand how to handle themselves in certain and different situations. Not to say that the Leafs and, guys like Matthews, Nylander, Marner, can't respond to the pressure, can't handle this pressure that they're receiving. I mean, they're definitely under the microscope in Toronto tenfold, right? It's like no pressure a lot of players would ever feel in other markets. The Leafs are a huge thing, obviously in Toronto, but I what I really think is just, if you're a player in that manner and you see how William Nylander kind of addresses Marner, and obviously, they're down 3-0 at that point, or even it might have been 3-1 or 4-0, something like that. Either way, they're down in the game. I don't think that's a reaction that you want to necessarily see from your top players. Like, it's fine to be angry. It's fine
There's
to
an
be frustrated.
A on his
Yeah,
jersey.
exactly. It's fine to be angry. It's time to be frustrated. It's fine to be angry, fine to be frustrated. But I think if you're going to react in that manner, that's something you have to do in the locker room. You cannot let the other team see you react in that way, because Boston sees that and says, well, look, we got them now. We're in their heads. They're, in a situation where, hey, you're down in a game, you should save the frustration, save the energy that you're putting to react like this on the bench, and save it for the ice, right? Like, take some accountability. Think about the situation that you're in. Is you reacting this way as a top player on this team, being the Leafs, going to have a beneficial impact on the rest of your team? Because the rest of the team is seeing, hey, look at this guy who's getting paid 10.9 million or whatever Marner's making, and look how he's reacting when the going gets tough. How are we going to react? Because leadership comes top down, right? Seeing one of the leaders of your team react in that manner when the going gets tough, it's probably not a positive thing for your room. And I think that's why, the way Tortorella kind of treats his players, pushes his players, kind of expects them to act like pros as soon as they kind of enter the Flyers locker room, and as soon as they're NHL players, is such a huge thing, because ultimately he's pushing them and he's trying to get them ready for these types of situations where the pressure is going to be on. He's pressuring them as a coach to ensure that when the pressure comes in game, that, hey, if they could take the pressure from me, they're going to be able to take the pressure from the other team and respond on the ice, right?
Exactly.
And I mean, who knows what Sheldon Keefe's doing in the room? Like, if he's having these types of conversations with them behind closed doors, like, we're not there. We don't know what's happening. Maybe he's already done this, right? And it's just not working. He's been the coach there for multiple seasons at this point. But I think just for you to react in the way that Marner did in that situation, like, in games and have the other team see that you're basically blowing up and see that, hey, we got under his skin. That's almost like waving the white flag in a sense. Like you don't want to show that type of weakness to your opponent. You need to kind of man up,
You want to
take
send
the
a
account,
message in
yeah,
that moment.
take the accountability and say, hey, you know what? We're playing like shit, but we can go out on our next shift, channel that frustration, channel that energy, and try to respond on the ice versus throw my gloves on the bench and have a temper tantrum. So
Yeah, and if you look at Sheldon Keefe's press conference from that game, it wasn't like he seemed down. Like he seemed
yeah.
like I would much rather take towards his anger and aggression versus yeah, well they're trying and then nobody gave up and yeah, we're trying. Like
Yeah.
that was the theme of that press conference.
Well, the thing is, like Nylander mentioned too in his presser after that game, he said, "Oh, that happens all the time. Like we're not. It's not like we don't get along or like we hate each other or anything, but it's just
I don't think they do.
we're trying to challenge each other." Which I
Yeah.
think, sure, they are trying to challenge each other, but I think just doing it in that specific way out in the open almost shows that, hey, like Boston rattled us,
You do
and
that in the locker room.
yeah, we don't have an answer for it on the ice, obviously, because
Yes.
they couldn't come back in that game ultimately, and now they're down 3-1 in the series. And I think when it comes to coaching and just the way you want your coach to handle your locker room, you would want your best players to continually be challenged and kind of be pushed up against that wall. So when these situations do come, they don't react in adverse ways you might not expect, right? Like I doubt Sheldon Keefe expected that reaction from Mitch Marner. But maybe because he wasn't pressured enough throughout, the past few seasons, maybe he wasn't, not to say accustomed to what it would be like in that situation, but maybe he just wasn't well equipped enough to deal with that situation when it happened.
Well, we've talked about it quite a bit. Teams that don't struggle when they get to the playoffs and it's that first sign of struggle, they will collapse. The Flyers have been through relentless struggle as an organization. And I love like I think Tortorella's attitude is working. Look, it's way too early. The Flyers could end up not being this way. For all we know, we could be worse than Toronto. I don't know, right?
Yeah,
Like
our
we
players might react in like different ways. I just think like when you look at it, like for example, like Tortorella mentioned with Konechny, oh, sometimes we have to rein Konechny in, like he gets too emotional on the ice. But key word, on the ice, right? Like
yeah.
it's different when it's on the ice in the game.
He's
I
like
think
trying to rip people's heads off.
yeah, like to do something like that, like on the bench when you're losing, it almost seems like not like you're quitting or giving up, but it just seems like the frustration is getting to one of our leaders on the team. So how's the rest of the team going to take it, seeing him getting this frustrated, right? Like it's just not a good situation, and it's not a way that you want to kind of react if you're Marner.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just thought it was a really good comparison for like a torts appreciation, right? Like I don't think people really understand Tortorella. Like, I don't think his reputation aligns. Like, even the story that I heard from Saint Frank Cervalli talking about how players are unhappy. Like, dude, I don't care. I can't be like, look, maybe I'm wrong, but like, I don't care. It's working. Buy in. Look at the way you guys played. Sure, you had a mild collapse. Coots was benched 2 games. Get over it. Get over it. Look at how he's changed this organization. He does not need to be perfect. None of these coaches will be perfect. Laviolette was not perfect. None of the coaches around, everybody wanted Mike Babcock. None of these coaches are perfect. Jim Montgomery is not perfect. He also walked into a great locker room, right? Like he didn't walk into a disheveled room to have to turn the culture around. He already walked into a Bruins culture that's been doing this for years. He's a great coach. I'm not taking away from him, but he didn't have to turn a culture around. I think what Tortorella is doing is working, and I think players need to buy in. And if anybody who's not buying in, take a look in the mirror and say, can I push myself harder? I know it's hard to do that, but that's what we have to get to. We want to be winners. We don't want to just be good or competitive. We want to beat other teams. We want to look at our team and be like, hey, the Flyers are one of the teams to envy in the league. Tell me that everybody looked at the Boston Bruins lineup this year and said, oh, they are so loaded with talent. They don't need any high-end talent. Why do they keep whooping the ass of teams that have like Toronto on paper by a lot of people's metrics, which I don't agree with, would say they have more talent than the Bruins. I don't agree with that. I don't think talent is just stick handling and shooting.
Well, it's how you can play it also as a cohesive
It's a
unit.
complete game.
Yeah, and I think to your point, right?
And those are complete. I'm sorry to cut you off. Marner is a complete player. He might not play in the way he would, but he is. He's a two-way player. Same with um
Matthews.
Matthews. Thank you.
Yeah, but to your point, Yuri, I was just going to say that I think a guy like Jim Montgomery for the Bruins, with their roster, with the fact that people were doubting the talent on that roster, probably use that as a motivator, that to push the team, saying, "Hey, like look at all the doubts. Like let's push ourselves. Let's try to be the best versions of ourselves." Like I'm sure Sheldon Keefe is doing that with the Leafs too, but there's
Sure.
just some sort of disconnect, obviously, where you have your star player reacting in that way.
Yeah.
And I think, like, do we see any other teams so far in the postseason where, they're down in a series and their star players losing their shit and throwing their gloves on the bench? Like, I just think like, to see that, it's almost like I said multiple times already, it's almost like you're waving the white flag. Like, I have
Yeah.
no idea what to do. Let me just throw my
Washington got
gloves.
swept and never did that. They fought till the very end,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they did
Right.
that this season too. They were down and out, right, at like several points. And look, I don't know if Sheldon Keefe is not a good coach. Usually, I would say most coaches get fired. Let him get fired. Let him rebound. He probably will be a better coach after
Probably
that.
be the next coach of the Penguins
Yeah,
here.
that's a pretty good guess. Though it would be funny if Mike Sullivan goes to the Leafs and Sheldon
Swap,
O'Keefe.
yeah.
I mean, I think that's exactly the type of coach the Leafs need, Mike
Him,
Sullivan.
or I was thinking Berube if
Yeah,
if it worked
I
out
was
here.
thinking that too, and he's got to be high on people's lists in this offseason, especially like Seattle, which is funny because they just keep going for like ex Flyers coaches.
Or maybe
Um,
Brindamore, right? Like who knows what happens with the Canes, but they have
I
that
can't see them
that
firing him.
Francis Brindamore connection. Well, I don't even think that. I just think that it might be because Rod the Bod's contract is up here. So Carolina has to extend him, and the owner is known to be cheap. So who knows if
But
Seattle throws, ton of money at Brindamore, will he go with his buddy Ron Francis? I mean,
I
we'll
think
see. But
I think he would be like the most. Look, it's possible. I think they'd be r- stupid,
yeah,
stupid to let that guy go.
100%. Probably might arguably maybe the best coach in the league. So
Right, exactly. He's definitely in the conversation of top five, right? Every single season he's been that way. But I think they're going to be. I think they might be the team to come out of the East, to be honest with you.
I,
So,
I could see
so
it.
look at the way Florida's playing. We'll talk about it, but um, it's going to be a tight. It's going to be really tight this year. There are no favorites going into this finals. I don't see any at least. Yeah. So and Dave Haxtell, unfortunately, I don't really understand why he got fired. From what I gather and what I heard, that not all players were happy with Dave Haxtell. Again, just consistent. Like, there's no way all the players are gonna like you. I think it's just, he kind of they kind of got better and then regressed. So I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like if we bring another guy in, can we take another jump? We'll see. I assume there were some complaints about him. But again, I don't think he's a bad coach either. Nobody would have said that last season, right? Like about Hacksaw.
Yeah. Is this
So
Seattle's third or fourth year in the league?
it's a good question. Fourth?
Because I'm just thinking about it, like most coaches only
Dude, about
last
2 years.
three, like 2 to 4 seasons, even if,
Yeah,
and four is like a
long.
generous, yeah, that's like a generous, thought there. Like usually it's even shorter than that. And I think you're 100% right. Like with Hackstall, they made the playoffs last season, regressed a bunch this season. So
Yeah.
they were probably looking to take another step, make the postseason again here, right?
Yeah, and sometimes the coach is just not the right coach for that team. He might not be and that's like could be the case with Sheldon Keefe. Like maybe he's just not the right coach for that group, And you look at Buffalo right now, who brought in Lindy Ruff after what he was there for a decade, maybe I think it was decade plus, maybe
Yeah.
even 11 years, and he kind of went around, coached other teams. They found a bunch of different coaches, and they're like, no, we're going back to Lindy and he's going to be coach of that team. He might be the right coach at the right time for that team now, and they might finally get over the hump because they do have an abundance of talent. I mean, that back end defense, like, should be scary at
Yeah.
this
And Tage
point,
Thompson and Tuck is pretty good up front there.
and they
So
they obviously will have a lot of youth kind of growing. So they are going to still be one of the up and coming teams. It takes a while from that
Yeah.
downfall. This is why I don't care about what people say about tanking. It takes a while to get out of that, regardless if you draft near the top of the draft or not. Unless you find a Bedard, which again, they still stink, but unless you find like a Bedard, there's really no way to shortcut it unless you get a generational talent. And that will only get you so far, as
You
we
still
see
need to
with the Maple
build.
Leafs.
Yeah, you
Right.
still need to build around them. You need like the certain elements that are going to get you far in the playoffs, which is, I mean, in my opinion, goaltending is one of them, and
Yeah.
obviously sound defense, which are I think are probably two of the Leafs' biggest problems if you look at them specifically. But for Seattle, yeah, only their third season, so Hackstall's third season as a coach, but to see them go from eighth in the Pacific, which was last, and to fourth and losing in the second round last season, and that was Game 7 loss in the second round too, so they were almost in the conference finals to not making it. I think that's probably what it is. Like you go from the second round and not making the playoffs, that would probably get any coach fired. So
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's true. All right, so the next big of piece of big news is Sean Couturier. So he has suddenly fired his agent. Was it Brisson?
yeah,
Pat Brisson?
so Pat Person is his new agent. And
Oh, right. He brought
he's
him
with
Brisson.
he's with
CAA.
CAA Sports
Yeah.
Group. I think his prior agent was Eric Lupian.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thank you. I should have looked that up prior. Yeah, so Sean Couturier has suddenly changed agents. Um, Look, I think there's probably a few different ways to look at this. And Vasili, you tell me if you agree with this or not. On one hand, yes, you can speculate that he's looking for a trade. We've seen that happen before. We saw that happen with Nolan Patrick here, right? Right before he wanted out. We know about that issue with Tortorella and all that. But on the other hand, this could actually be a positive that it's like, hey, I don't feel like this guy represented me properly and created like rumor like Couturier is not really like a drama guy.
Yeah.
There's been no drama about this dude. And then all of a sudden, like the agent comes out, says publicly, Tortorella goes, I don't even know if that guy's his agent, blah, blah, blah. Maybe Couturier was just like, hey, I feel like you damaged my view, like the view of me in the room. And I remember this happened to Joel Farabee, where he had I think this was under Vino, where he had a complaint privately, and then it ended up being public. And it's like, I don't really think
I was
most
also under
players.
Torts actually. So
Oh, that was under Torts. Well,
yeah.
like I don't think players really want that out there. If they say something to their agent, for the
Yeah.
agent to go and make that public, because I don't really think Couturier wants to go anywhere. And the biggest caveat I say to that is like, if you really wanted to get traded and you were Sean Couturier, you have a phenomenal relationship with Danny Briere. You don't need to go even find a new agent. You just go talk to Briere. And they are friends.
Yeah,
Remember, he
considering he
lived
lived
with
with
him.
him.
He
So
lived with Briere. He's friends with his family. Like that is a conversation you can have in private to be like, hey, look, I don't know if this is going to work out long term. See if you can find something. Again,
yeah.
Couturier's value is at a low right now because of the second half of the year, the injury stuff. He's got a long term deal. But I don't know. I don't get the sense that he's looking for a trade. It looks to me more like he just wants a change in representation. Maybe he does want to trade, out of town. Maybe he's like, hey, my career's, I don't know how many years I have left. Can I go play for a contender, maybe win a cup? I look at, again, I'm just throwing this out there, but I look at like Tampa Bay. It's the same coach as Steve or agent of Steven Stamkos. Does he want to go to like Tampa Bay and fit into that team? It's possible, but he was just named captain of this team. Like it just would seem so strange to be named captain, to go through one minor hiccup, fire your agent, and then to get the hell out of here when you're friends with the GM, like personal friends with the GM, and you just get back on the ice where the team was patient with you, held you back out of the lineup, saying nothing but positive stuff about you, at least from an organizational standpoint. All your friends are here. This is your city. Players usually don't want to leave those type of situations. So I don't know. That's how I view it. It just seems unlikely that he actually is looking for a trade, but we don't know. I mean, crazier things have happened here. So who knows? What do you think?
Yeah, obviously, I think to preface, we don't really know what's happening behind closed doors, so that's something we have to point out. I
Yeah,
think it's really rare for any captain typically to demand a trade. Like, I can't really remember the last captain who demanded a trade, and usually
I can. Well, I
who
don't know
was
if it would
that?
demand Brady to Chuck, but that's not like publicly.
Yeah, exactly.
And he is a kid, and that's why you don't make kids captains. That's
Yeah,
just the
so
story.
who knows? But like, yeah, just off the top of my head, like it's rare. It's a real rare situation to see a captain demand a trade. Usually, if a captain's getting traded, it's a situation like a Giroux situation where, you know,
He's at the
he's the
end.
captain of a really bad team and he's at the end of his contract, and they end up moving on from him due to that,
Ryan
right? Because
Smith, Shane Doan,
yeah, it's happened a ton with stuff like that. You know, Matt Sundin going to Vancouver.
Jason Smith.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of situations. With Couturier, I really see two scenarios here. So the first scenario is you change your agent, and you go with a more veteran agent, an agent like Pat Brisson, who might be able to navigate a trade for you more smoothly than Eric Lupien might. Like in terms of, okay, this is going to be a high profile trade. If I'm Sean Couturier requesting a trade after being named captain here, it's going to be something that's very tough to navigate. Just firstly, based on the fact that he has a very large contract, is in his early 30s, coming off two back surgeries, and he did not look really great in the final half of this season. So first off, trying to trade him, I think Couturier probably would know himself that it's a tough ask potentially for the Flyers, especially this offseason. It might be a tough trade where they'd have to take money back if they were going to
They're not
trade
going
him.
to do that.
And yeah, exactly. And they're not going to do that just with the situation that they're in because they think to themselves, well, if we're going to take similar money back, we might as well just keep Couturier.
Yeah.
Because we're already thin at center. Now we're going to deal one of our centers away. Just
Our
roster
best
building.
center.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's the one option, right? Where Couturier thinks, hey, like I need a veteran agent that's versed in, you know, these types of trades of players requesting trades, and I need him to navigate this for me with Daniel Briere. And I would go with your point, Yariv, where I think that's a slim chance because if that was the case, I think the relationship between Briere and Couturier would not warrant the agent change, right? I think if he needed to be traded or want to be traded so desperately, he would likely just go to Briere and they would be able to work something out where he said, hey, if I can possibly trade you and anybody actually wants to take you with the contract and with the injury history, I'm going to give it my best shot. I don't think Brisson would be needed in that situation. The second circumstance is because he changed agents due to the fact that he didn't like the way the situation between him and Tortorella was handled. And he thinks that having a veteran agent like Pat Brisson, who's, you know, had multiple high profile clients over his tenure as an agent,
And I
and
just let me add one thing. Just look this up. He also Pat Brisson also represents Nick Seeler, Eric Johnson, and Cam York. Just want to add that in there.
yeah,
Sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
that factors in. So yeah, so just for him to like look at changing from Lupien to Brisson, right? Like that might end up sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but
Sorry, it's my fault.
no worries.
Yeah, you were talking about the relationship between him and Tortorella and how he'd probably want to rectify that, right?
Yeah. So he'd want to rectify that. So yeah, I got it back now. I think really what it would be is that maybe he didn't like the way that Lupien handled the situation as agent, and he thinks in the future, if there's ever situations where me and the coach don't see eye to eye, or I need to bring concerns to the front office, maybe Pat Brisson will help me do it in a way that doesn't blow it out of proportion, like this kind of got blown out of proportion here. So that's my thoughts. Like if you look at Lupien's initial reaction to what happened with the Couturier scratching, this is what he said in the media. He said, Sean won't learn anything by being in the bleachers, Lupien said. He's not a second-year pro that went through a cold streak. Sean is the leader and the captain of the Flyers. So by putting him in the bleachers for a player who's going to be ashamed to be there, if there's no communication, why between the two in 2024, from my perspective, isn't always good for a coach to establish regimental fear. So I just think what it is Couturier, at least my perspective on it probably, is Couturier didn't like the way that Lupien kind of went into the media and said all these things. Who knows if he even went to Couturier before he said these things? And I think Couturier looks at that and said, hey, you brought an unnecessary amount of media attention on me by the way you handled this. You even might have, you know, worsened the relationship between me and my coach by the way that you handled this.
Yeah.
And I think Couturier looks at it and says, hey, let me bring in a veteran agent here in Pat Brisson who's not going to do anything. And if he is, he's going to come to me first before he does anything. And I do want to point out as well that Lupien and Couturier, they do have a bit of like a long-standing relationship because his father was actually Couturier's agent and then his father passed away and he took over essentially. So there's like a long-standing history. So who knows, right? Like he's kind of been under this Lupien family since coming into the NHL here. So maybe it's just time for a change, right? And maybe it's too personal of a relationship and it needs to be more professional in the
That's
sense
a
where
great point.
where the agent doesn't think that, oh, I'm on such a personal level with Sean that I can just go to the media without even asking him.
Right.
And a
That's a
guy like
great
Pat
point
Brisson,
too.
who's a veteran, probably wouldn't do something like that. And then the last thing I want to bring up regarding Couturier, it's actually a tweet that Kevin Kurz put out earlier this afternoon. It's regarding the situation. So he said, my understanding of Sean Couturier changing agents is that it's primarily about communication. He has a more established agency now with Pat Brisson and CAA that can go to the Flyers FO front office if there's any issues that arise. No, he's not asking for a trade or anything like that. So based on Kurz and what he's heard,
So it
seems
seems
to
like,
kind of seems to be in line with what we're stating that
yeah.
it's more communication related and probably Couturier just didn't like how his agent handled the situation with
I
Tortorella.
mean, you heard it in his responses when he kept being asked about it. You could see like,
It's behind me.
well,
Yeah.
Couturier kept wanting to be like, are we really gonna like? He probably was annoyed by the fact that he had to deal with that, and it probably made it worse for him rather than him just because he probably wanted to dictate. Like, look, maybe he didn't even react the best way, but adding the agent's comments on top of it, it makes you look even more into what he was saying, where maybe he was just frustrated in that moment. You know what I mean? Like he's never been benched in his whole career. He's never been benched. So even as a rookie, he was not benched. So it was probably new to him. And again, he's not the only player that was benched. He's not the only player that was demoted. And how does that make you look as a leader of that room where you have public complaints and like you didn't hear anything from like Scott Lawton's camp, you didn't hear
Or
anything,
Atkinson. Yeah.
or Atkinson's camp or Frost's camp. Like where's Frost's agent like complaining publicly about like so yeah, I think it does come down to that. And again, just the relationship with him and Danny, I can't see it. Like you
Yeah.
don't even need your agent for that type of conversation.
And I think Yariv Danny knows this as well. Like the best case scenario for the Flyers is for Couturier to play like he did in the first half of this past
Yeah,
season. Like it doesn't bode anybody well for him to, continue down, let's say, this path. Like they want him to get back to that level that he showed prior earlier in the season versus what he did in the second half. And I think Couturier and Briere would probably admit themselves, like even if he was looking for a trade with the way he played, they probably and his
it would
contract, they
be
probably
so tough to move him
yeah,
right
they
now.
wouldn't be able to trade him anyway without probably having to take another player in similar circumstances that has a huge contract that might not be living up to what the
Yeah,
money being paid. So I think even for the Flyers, if let's say, and I don't think they're looking to trade him at all,
I
in
don't
my
think so
opinion,
either.
but even if they were, I think they know that, hey, if we do want to move this guy eventually down the line, if we think that, hey, it might be beneficial to us, might not line up with our timeline to contend for a cup for whatever reason, we need to get him playing how he did, this first half of the season, and then maybe we can trade him.
Yeah,
So trying to do that from a position of weakness, like you said, like they have no leverage right now if they were trying to trade Couturier, just based on everything that's happened over the last half of the season and the issues with Tortorella. So I think, like I said, best cases, hopefully Sean can get back to his prior play and then see what happens from that point.
yeah. No, I think you're spot on, and I think Kevin Kurz is probably spot on. I assume he has some inside word on that. And I was listening to Charlie O'Connor, and he also said, I've heard nothing to make me think that Sean Couturier wants to be traded, right? And these guys are around the locker room on a regular basis. I just think it's unlikely. I think he wants to continue, just like Lawton. This is a guy who wants to continue what they've been doing here. He's in a very similar situation as Lawton, as being like a lifer flyer. He's part of the leadership group. TK is entering that group now. It's like, I don't think these guys are trying to run away from the situation. I think they're trying to see where this goes. Um, all right, let's go to our next topic, and this is we'll talk about like off-season stuff. So the Flyers have a slew of free agents. I'll read them out here. This is at all levels. One of which is already gone in Guryanov. So at the NHL level, the Flyers have Guryanov UFAs. They have Guryanov. They have Eric Johnson. They have Mark Stahl. At the AHL UFAs, they have Adam Brooks, Tanner Lazinski, Cooper Marudi, Victor Mete, Felix Sandstrom. At the RFA level, they have Zamula and Brink at the NHL level. in the RFA status. And at the AHL RFA status, they have Will Smolik, Adam Yinning, and Mason Millman. What are our thoughts about guys coming back? I'll take a crack at it first. I think majority of these guys are not. Guryanov's already gone. I don't think Eric Johnson's going to come back here. I do think there's a chance he's going to sign another contract, but I think he's probably going to go to a contender for like a number 7 role, maybe a number 6 role. But I can't see him re-signing here unless he comes in at like that $1 million level, like Mark Stahl did. I think the Flyers would be open to that. I don't know if he so much would be open to that, especially because he doesn't live in Philadelphia. But then again, he just came from Buffalo, so we don't know. I think maybe that's a maybe. The other two obviously no. I think Mark Stahl might retire. AHL level, I think Adam Brooks, there's a really good chance he does come back as an AHL player. He played a huge role for the Phantoms last year, was injured majority of this year, huge role for them at the end of the year and now in the playoffs. Him and Taylor Lazinski have been their best players. Lazinski, I don't know. Originally, I thought like there's no way he's coming back. I think at his age, he probably should test the UFA market and see if he can go get a one-way contract for an NHL team. He probably could make an NHL roster out there, especially for a team that's not that good. He'd have a good chance to be in the mix there. He's also a very good AHL player, so I think a lot of teams would be interested. I think if he's open to a two-way contract or even a one-way but AHL bound contract, I think the Flyers would be open to it. But I doubt it. Cooper Marudi's an interesting one. He's been good here offensively every year. He clearly is an AHL player. I think there's a chance, but he might be moving on as well. Victor Mete, I think it's getting crowded on the Flyers or on the Phantoms back end. I could see him trying to go for another NHL role somewhere. Felix Sandstrom, I think we all know he probably won't be back. And then the RFA will Zamula, I think it's an interesting one. I think there is a chance that he gets moved, but I think most likely he'll get some kind of short-term bridge contract with the Flyers. I think they saw enough to at least give him like a one-year deal. But there's also a chance that he could get moved. That is possible. You just don't really have a replacement for him. But I could see it happening just because the ceiling's not that high. But I think Tortorella likes him enough that they would give him a one-year deal. Bobby Brink, I think for sure is going to get some kind of bridge deal, probably around $1 million or something. But they'll consider him as an NHL player at this point. And then the AHL RFAs, Will Smolik, I don't think he will get re-signed. I think he was brought in to be a Phantom, and he spent most of his time in the ECHL. I think there's a good chance he's going to go somewhere else. Adam Yinning, I think the Flyers will look to re-sign, and that is kind of up to him. They'll definitely want him in the AHL again and see if he can make an NHL, take that NHL spot, but he hasn't solidified that, so it's kind of up to him. I think he's probably going to stay. All right. What do you think, dude?
Yeah, obviously, the Flyers have some decisions to make here. It's going to be pretty interesting just to see, the route they decide to go. I think for the UFAs, like Johnson's probably gone, like you were stating. Same with Mark Stahl. Like I would assume with just the amount of prospects the Flyers have on the back end that they're going to try to fill those roles internally, whether that be with an Adder, Andre, Jennings, whoever that may be. I think they'll definitely look for some internal fills there on the defense and just especially like the third pair and stuff like that. Then just when you're looking at Gurianov, I mean, Briere's already mentioned he won't be back. Sandstrom as well is not going to be back. Just if you're looking at at the goaltending situation, essentially. And then Mete, um, definitely won't be back. Just you mentioned, I mean, look at the defense, look at how many prospects that the Flyers have. Like I don't even think he played every single game this season, right? So add even more younger defensive players into the mix for next season. He's even kind of going to get less playing time. So I would imagine he probably wants to find a better situation for himself there, if possible. And then I think the two that could be back is maybe Lazinski or Marudi. I think both guys at this point probably are just AHL guys. Maybe Lazinski has a chance to crack in, a fourth line role or crack like a fourth line on another team. But I think might have to be like a outstanding training camp or some injuries happen. He gets into a role and then they kind of realize, hey, this guy can hold his own on the fourth line. I don't know if anybody's going to really give him a clear outright shot at making a team. Um, but I could definitely see Lazinski and Marudi being back just because they're probably one of the or some of the Phantom's highest scorers. So you subtract those guys from that team, and how good are they really going to be next season? I'm sure some young guys will take steps, but those are guys that are firmly in the top six for the Phantoms, right? So it would be big losses for them. So I could see them coming back. For the RFAs, I expect Zamula at the least to get a 1 year deal. I think you could even see with the way he played, right? Like he played pretty well this season. He essentially improved in a lot of aspects from if you saw his game from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. So I think the Flyers want to see if there's even more improvements that can be made. So I could definitely see a 1-2 year deal. And then for Mason Millman, I mean, it's unfortunate, like friend of the podcast, but just with what things have been happening with his career, like back to the ECHL once again, I could definitely see the Flyers letting him go and not sending in a qualifying offer or resigning him.
Which
And then Zamol,
might be best for him to go try
yeah,
somewhere else.
exactly right. Try another organization, see if he gets another shot somewhere else. Smolek, I would expect the same type of thing. Like there's just so many defensemen. I think they tried him this year as a 1 year type of deal out of college. Okay, see what he has. Maybe he's like a diamond in the rough, but just the playing time and the other prospects, I would expect that he will be an odd man out. And then I think Ginning will be back just based on the way he played to end the season. I think the Flyers can ultimately look at him and say, hey, like there's upside here. He held his own pretty well against some top teams during that 7 game gauntlet. I think he could definitely be a third pair option for them for next season, or maybe even a seventh defenseman. Like I think they'll definitely look to bring him back. The only reason why he wouldn't come back would be if he doesn't want to, right? Like maybe he thinks, hey, like I have a better opportunity for my career in general and back in Sweden. Who knows what he's thinking? But I would expect Jennings to be back, and then obviously Carter Hart is not going to be back. That would be the big other RFA there.
Yeah. Well, we don't really know what his status will be either. Whether the Flyers will retain his rights or not.
I'm sure we'll find
Um,
out at some point here.
yeah, I'll be honest with you. I think they probably would. I think all the teams that lost those guys probably would retain their rights, and they'll have the option to either walk away from the deal,
Hmm.
and allow them to go into UFA. But I imagine that status will just get kicked down the road. And I think he'll just lose his like arbitration status, right? Like he won't
No,
be able to go
of
to
course.
arbitration. Most likely, those players probably won't be able to get a long-term deal anyway. Just because of what happened. If they do, if assuming that they're not guilty, assuming that things pan out in that direction, but we'll talk about that if that actually becomes the case. We're gonna, like you said, there's gonna be a while. And just a little bit of update here. I just saw this. No Austin Matthews tonight for the Maple Leafs
Wow, that's a big loss for them in an
in an
elimination
elimination
game.
game. Woo! Things are gonna get spicy in Toronto, dude. I am sorry.
I'm sure I'm gonna hear
There's
about it
yeah.
at every turn, but I mean, it's going to be interesting, like with him out, because I think you have your best player out. Do Marner and Nylander step up, after kind of the hissy fit
Hey,
last game? So
look.
it's a good opportunity for them to bounce back
I
and kind
agree.
of, change the narrative after last game, right?
Yeah, they didn't look. They're not losing these games because of talent, right? And look, Matthews humongous loss, but a team can win by playing a team game, playing hard hockey. I would not be shocked if they win today. I wouldn't be shocked at all, actually. You can rally around those moments around your public image. There's no doubt that they saw everything that was being said about them
Yeah.
publicly and that they won't want to try to silence that. Having said that, the Bruins are a very focused hockey team.
For me,
It's going to take a lot.
I think at least for this game tonight, for some reason I have the feeling it's either going to go one of two ways: the Leafs rebound and get the win, or the Bruins absolutely blow them
Blow
out.
them out. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any middle ground where it's a close game, then the Leafs lose. But we'll see what happens here.
I could see it being a close game and they still lose, but I will tell you Vegas has them as the game's in Toronto, right?
In Boston, actually.
Oh, it's in Boston. Okay, then they're not actually that heavy of a favorites considering just the Vegas odds. Considering the Bruins are at home, it's actually
That's
It's not that
strange.
bad.
You'd think the Bruins would be the favorites at home.
Yeah, it's minus 166 to plus 140, and you have to account for the home advantage there.
Mhm.
So, you know, it depends. We'll see. Um, but yeah, not looking good for the Leafs. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, since we're talking about UFA stuff, you know, it's definitely early for this, and most UFA statuses are not real. I bring it up all the time. People love to talk about like Steven Stamkos and all these guys. It's like until they're actually available, like you have no idea. Stamkos could re-sign in Tampa. Like he had 40 goals this year. Like it's not like he's like a waste of it. He could sign a short-term contract with them, like a two
Yeah, he was one
year.
of their best players once again, as he has
Mhm.
been.
Right.
So
Like they'll pay him. They just don't want to give him term. He's 34 years old, but he might, he's a captain of their team. He might resign.
I could see a 3 year, like
Right.
he's getting 8.5 million right now. I could easily see him signing 3 years for the exact same cap hit at
Yeah.
8.5 or
Yeah.
even 8 million, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I think so too. I think that's all possible. And then kind of finishing his career with Tampa. But considering that 6-1 loss a little deceiving. They were definitely in that game for majority of the time until they started pushing and pushing. And
Well, they
it,
had
it
2 goals Yariv called back.
I know.
So
It
if you
was a
look at
crazy game.
that, I mean, John Cooper had a huge press conference saying, "Hey, like, you know, these goalie interference goals, like, were they really goalie interference? It kind of changed the
It
whole
looked
momentum
like
of the
goal.
game."
At least those Sergachev goal that looked like goaltender interference to me.
Yeah, the other one I think was like too close to call, right? Like, who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah.
But I get Cooper's point. But yeah, for Stamkos, like, I mean, would he be of interest to the Flyers if makes it to UFA? That's something where who knows, right? Like, it would kind of be going
I would
against
be
what.
interested.
Yeah, I would be interested, but it's going against the philosophy that the team kind of
Not if it's a
states.
short term deal.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Briere did say in the presser they're not looking to give, long-term deals to older veterans, which Stamkos falls in that range. But if you could get him for 2, 3 years, I think the benefit outweighs the negative, just in terms of the experience and what he could bring to the Flyers, obviously.
Yeah, I just think realistically, like he's gonna if he doesn't sign in Tampa Bay, he's gonna go to
Another contender.
a contender. Yeah, he'll even probably take a little less money to sign with that contender to make sure he can compete for the
How
Stanley Cup
crazy would
playoffs
it
for them.
be to see the Leafs trade Marner and then sign Stamkos to replace him?
I mean, it would be wild
He's
news.
from Toronto, so
I think people would be happy and upset about that in Toronto, is my guess. I think there are probably still a lot of Mitch Marner fans there that are
Oh,
not
of
too
course.
caught
Yeah.
up in the moment. The other one I brought up, and I think you listened to the episode, Elias Lindholm is a name that interests me. I don't know if he would actually sign here, but I look at his down year and the fact that he's 29 years old. Like, would he take recouping, like, let me build my career back up type of signing? You figure the fact that he probably would slot into our first line. He would probably play with Travis Konechny. And that's what Konechny would need. And I look at a player like that, like maybe there's an option there. I could see them maybe go out and sign another defenseman. I was looking at Shane Gostisbehere. I think it's highly unlikely because I think he earned a multi-year deal with the fact that he's again on like close to a 60-point pace, pretty much been doing it every year. But there are some names out there. Like would we bring a Joel Pavelski in here for a year? He's 39 years old, but I would consider giving him a year contract just to have that guy in our locker room. There's other guys like Brandon Montador I'd be interested in. Um, Brendan Dillon, probably Chris Tanev, all these guys potentially on a short term deal. Even Brody, if Alec Martinez is out there for a short term deal, I'd be interested. These are all guys who were paid kind of substantial contracts, but might be
Yeah.
looking for less, just being in the spot they are.
I think for the defense, the two specifically that I would look at, I think Martinez would be a great
He's
veteran
36,
guy.
but yeah.
Yeah, but if you sign him only for, let's say, a 1 year, 2 year deal, I think he'd be a great veteran guy for some of the younger defensemen to learn
Hmm.
from. Especially if you're removing Stahl and you're removing Johnson, right? You really only have that one solidified veteran in Sealer. I mean, you have Ristolainen too, but we kind of have the hunch he might be on the move. So if you're going to remove Ristolainen and then replace him with a guy
Right.
like a Martinez to be your other veteran type of guy on defense. I think that makes a ton of sense. And then the other two here that I'm looking at, Brett Pesce from Carolina at
Oh
29.
yeah. Well,
I
he
don't
would be
know if
great.
they're gonna let him go or what's gonna happen there,
Right.
but
Right.
money's always a problem, seems to be with the Hurricanes. So that's something to factor
What
in.
about
And the other one
sorry.
too is he's an RFA, but I just look at Vancouver. I'm not sure what the cap situation is, but
They
Philip
have it.
Hronek. Um,
They have cap space. I looked this up the other day when I was looking up Lindholm.
yeah, well, I was just looking at Hronek, like who knows what he's gonna want, but he's at 26. I mean, maybe there's a trade to be had, but at 26 years old, I mean, he's a guy maybe you add on defense, fits
Well,
that timeline, but
they have a lot of UFAs. I think look, I think we would definitely be interested in a player of his caliber, but I think they'll probably try to re-sign him.
yeah, I mean,
But
not
so
surprising.
a guy that maybe could be available, he's not too old, and we brought him up here before. Oliver Ekman Larson is 32 years old, had 32 points this year, 9 goals, 23 assists. Again, he's
Could
not the
see
player he
it.
used to be, but he was making 2.5 million this
Yeah.
past year. So you could potentially sign him on like a 2 year, $3 million deal.
For that production, that money, I think it would be worth it, and you get the veteran
Right.
experience.
Former captain.
I'm just looking at like the forwards, and I mean, obviously Stamkos is the big one that you're going to mention. But like later down the list, there's a couple that I mean, Lindholm is interesting. Obviously that you mentioned, and that would help with the center depth. I just wonder what kind of deal he's going to be looking for. But we'll see, right? He didn't have the greatest season this year, so it's not like he can go out there demanding
Right.
tons of money like he could have if he would have been a UFA kind of coming off those seasons with playing with Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk where he was getting almost 80, 90 points a season. But the guys on forward that really interest me the most that I'm seeing, Teuvo Teravainen, who's also
Mm.
a Carolina UFA and could, be an interesting center to add. And then the other one here is Martin Necas. So the theme is Carolina players.
Natchez is RFA.
RFA.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just look at the money and their cap situation and
But we'd have oh sorry.
they're gonna have to remove somebody, right? Like if they want like keep
Because
Gensel,
they're gonna keep Gensel.
that's
Yeah.
what I mean. If you're gonna keep Gensel, someone has to go here. So
Well, but it would have to be a trade, right? I like where your
yeah.
head's at. They'd have to trade that contract because there's no way we're gonna sign an RFA and then give up substantial
Oh
assets.
no, of course, yeah.
Right.
It'd have to be a trade for Natchez, but I think that's one of those things like Briere was mentioning, right? If there's a hockey trade for a young player that makes sense, young talented player
I
like
mean,
Natchez,
I think we would
why
all love Natchez.
yeah, why wouldn't the Flyers be all over that? I mean, the only downside is it's another winger. Like if you're going to be
Yeah.
using assets in a trade, I think the Flyers arguably would want to try to target a center,
What
but
about he could get re-signed and not even make it to UFA, and he just had a big recovery year, but Sean Monahan. I think he's gonna one term though. He's 29 years old. This is his last contract,
yeah,
realistically.
I think
He's
after his injury history, definitely he's going to be looking for some term. I mean, he
played
had a big
83 games this year.
yeah, he had a big bounce back season though. I mean, I would be open to it, but I just wouldn't personally. I wouldn't want to go over 3 years for Monahan.
What about Daniel Sprong? 27 years old, 43 points in 76 games, 18 goals, 25 assists, goal scoring winger. I don't think it's the top of our list.
Yeah, he was good for Detroit. I just think the Flyers have so many guys in the pipeline that kind of project
We'd
to
have
be
to
what
move a
he
winger.
is. Yeah. I think it's like if you let's say hypothetically, if you trade a winger to bring a center in and then you have a hole at wing, is Sprong a left wing or a right wing?
Both
Okay. So yeah, if you have a hole at wing and you trade from your already deep, pool of wingers to try to fill another need,
could
maybe.
be, yeah.
Yeah.
He could be a guy that I'm just looking for guys who are like maybe at an age where you can still get more out of them. Like
Yeah, under the radar
Well,
type
never
signings,
mind.
right?
Michael McLeod is never mind.
Yeah, in a different situation,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
He probably wouldn't be. He probably wouldn't make it to free agency if he actually got to play this season. But
No.
he would be that type of player. 26 years old, plays center. Never really hit his offensive ceiling. It's kind of tough. The other thing I was thinking about. So there's the Mitch Marner rumors obviously going on around there, and I just wanted to ask this question and see how you feel about it.
Hmm.
Mitch Marner for Travis Konechny. Would you make that trade?
Like in a straight up deal?
It would be. I mean, they're again they would definitely take Konechny in that trade. It would open up substantial cap space for them in the short term,
Yeah,
right? They
because they'd
get
have
about
to
5 million.
re-sign Konechny.
Right,
But
but
you're trading two guys on expiring deals here, so
right, with 1 year, each one of them has 1 year left on their
yeah.
contract. Both of which are high end players. Marner, definitely the elite playmaker. Konechny is more of like a Brad Marchand, like can score goals. But Konechny is definitely something that Toronto would want. 100%. That's
Yeah,
like
his personality, just the way he kind of drags the team into the
he'd
fight,
be
is always engaged. I think
he'd
like
be the opposite of
it's almost
Marner
the
in a lot of ways.
anti-Marner
Yeah. And
sense.
and then I ask, would the Flyers even consider that personality change?
Um, okay.
The
So
talent is tempting. That's without a
the
doubt.
way I look at it, I mean, like, look at Konechny, right? Like, we love Konechny. This season in 76 games had 68 points, 33 goals, 35 points. Like, I personally think he's healthy all season. I think he was dealing with a bit of an injury to the end of the year. Like, I think Konechny, you could safely say probably around a point a game player, um, potentially 40 goal scorer, could be more. If he plays with the
Especially playing
really,
with Matthews and Nylander
yeah, like playing with some
on
really
that
good,
power play.
exactly, playing with some really good players, skilled players on that power play, guys that can set him up. Like, chances are he's a 40 goal guy on the Leafs for sure. Marner's past, like, even in a down season, like, this is a down season for Marner, right?
Still
In 69
90.
games, he has 85 points.
Yeah.
And then last season in 80 games, 99. And then the season before that, 97 and 72. Like, technically, he's listed as a winger. I think if the Flyers acquire him, they get him back to center and try to develop
Hmm.
him more and establish him as a center.
This is why I was thinking
Um,
about it.
yeah, right. And like, he played center his whole career into juniors leading up to the NHL, played a couple seasons at center, and then the Leafs moved him to the wing. Personally, I mean, if it's straight up Marner
I
for
I don't see how the Maple Leafs could ask for more, considering Marner's cap hit.
yeah, if it's straight up, I would do the deal personally. And the reason being,
They're the same
it,
age,
yeah, the reason
same
being,
draft.
it's not even the age thing. Like, I think they're both really similar in age. It's just the need,
They're
right?
both
Like,
26,
what do you need as the Philadelphia Flyers? Do you need a top line centerman? Getting Mitch Marner
and he's two
could,
way. So
yeah,
it's not,
could, that's what I mean. He plays on the PK. Getting Mitch Marner could be that top line centerman you're looking for. And essentially, you got to look at it this way: like, you're going to pay Konechny maybe anywhere between 8 and 9.5 million
mm-hmm.
on Marner's deal. You might have to pay his new deal. It
Like
might be,
11.
yeah, 11 and a half. So, like, for the extra, offensive production that Marner might bring you, and the fact that he plays center, just from a roster building standpoint, I think it makes sense to make the trade. And I think the Flyers probably, if they do make that trade, believe that John Tortorella might be able to get even more out of him. And
Or you look at his reaction on
and
the
it might
bench.
go, yeah, it might go the opposite way, and it might be a
Yeah.
situation where that's untenable, right? Where like Tortorella and Marner don't get along at all, and it ends up
Yeah.
blowing up in your face. But I think if the Flyers were going to make the deal, they would probably have convinced themselves that, hey, Torch can get even more out of him,
Sure.
and I'm sure they'd probably have Tortorella have conversations with Marner before this even maybe would happen, if that's possible,
I
or
don't know
just
if it
like,
is.
yeah,
That
maybe
might be
that's
tampering.
tampering, but conversation in the sense that, hey, like, are you open to John Tortorella being your coach? I don't think they would trade for him, knowing that Marner's like, fuck
Because then
no.
you'd have to know he was going to resign here
Yeah, right. So
to give up on
you'd
connecting.
have to get some assurances. So I'm sure they would bring up the fact, like, how do you feel about working with John Tortorella on a close personal level? Is that something that you think you
Yeah.
could work with, right? So they'd get some insight for him. I think it'd be a real difficult trade to make, but I think if you're presented with that trade and you're the Flyers, just from a pure, value standpoint, and for from a pure roster management, like roster building standpoint, looking at, okay, what do we need and what do we have an overabundance of? Trading a winger for a center that scores on average 30 more points than the winger every season, I think it's a no-brainer. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm torn. I mean, if it's a video game, yeah, you know. But I look at Konechny's attitude,
Yeah,
and I don't think again, I still think he has another offensive, like I don't think he's gonna be 100+ point player with an elite roster every year like Marner, because I don't think he's a playmaker like Marner.
yeah,
Like I don't think he drives play in the same way. He doesn't. Let's just be honest. He doesn't drive play in the same way Marner does. He doesn't have the same skating gear that Marner has. And Marner's like a special offensive player in a lot of ways, and I love the way he plays. But I do look at what Konechny will bring. I look at the fact that I think we can get him on the lower end of what you're saying, not the higher end. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Um, and I look at the importance of him to our team. I don't know if I necessarily like jump at that, but to your point, it would be really hard to not. I just looked
Yeah.
at the Leaf situation. Like I was listening to Steve Dangle's podcast, and they were like, you're gonna trade Marner, you're not gonna get his like exact value, which is true.
Yeah, the
Just be
contract makes it hard because
right.
you have to find a team that can take on 10.9 million in the first
Now
place.
there are other situations. You look at the trade that Calgary made with Florida,
Yeah,
right? And
it's
how
not looking too
Florida,
good.
yeah. And that's why I was like thinking that I was like, not that Travis Konechny is Matthew Tkachuk. He's not. I don't think he's on the same level offensively, though I don't think he's too far behind. But he
Yeah.
also doesn't have the physical stature of Tkachuk. But the aggression, he does have that. Like the drive. He is there mentally. Like if he
No,
was
agreed.
4 inches taller, Konechny would be one of the most coveted players in the NHL.
Yeah, what makes it so interesting for me, Yariv, is I think intangible wise, just the way that like Konechny brings that energy on the ice. I think
Right.
that's when the Flyers wouldn't want to lose.
Right.
And the Flyers probably think, hey, like his energy, just the way kind of he handles himself on the ice, like, and just the physicality and the fact he tries to bring his teammates into the fight with him. I think the Flyers believe that Konechny could be a big playoff performer for them. But to caveat that, he's yet to do it in the playoffs, right? He has minimal production. Obviously, not on this Flyers team, different Flyers team being a younger player.
So
So they probably look at that and say, hey, like, Konechny hasn't done it in the playoffs either. Marner arguably hasn't done it in the playoffs at all either. So like you're almost trading guys that are similar in that sense, where on the big stage yet they both haven't really
right.
done anything. So
Let me ask you this. Would you trade, I'm just throwing out a random combination of players. Would you trade Cam York, Morgan Frost, and Bobby Brink for Mitch Marner?
Cam York, Morgan Frost, and Bobby Brink
I'm
for
just
Mitch
throwing, I don't
Marner.
know if it's enough.
Ooh, I mean, I don't want to move on from Cam York, and it sounds
That
crazy to
but
be
that's what it
like,
would take, right? You have to make it.
yeah,
Moving on with Konechny also makes you uncomfortable. That's what it would take.
exactly. I would be more comfortable making the Konechny trade than making the second trade.
Right. That's why I brought it up first because I actually think that one is a realistic one.
Yeah, I could definitely see the second one happening. I think if the Flyers trade Cam York in any way and get a Mitch Marner, like to your point, they're gonna have some sort of defensive move lined up, most likely
Well,
as
what if they
well.
draft Boyum
Yeah,
and
that
you
could be
know
their thought process. Who knows, right?
yeah, and I don't think again, I do not think the Flyers are looking to move on from York or Konechny, but if you want to get a guy of Marner's caliber, you're gonna have to give something substantial.
Yeah, of
Typically, if you're
course.
moving the best player in the deal, you lose that trade. Um, not always. Again, Florida found a way to well, actually, no. If you look at that, I was 100% right
Yeah,
because
Kachuk
Calgary
was the
lost.
best player.
If you're
So
moving the best player in the deal, you usually lose that trade.
yeah, and I think you have to caveat too that like, you mentioned Yariv, okay, Konechny could improve as well. So could Marner. Like he could become a 120 point player, like, in the right circumstances, getting pushed in the right way. Like who really knows? I think if you're the Flyers though, that would be one you really got to think about for sure.
Yeah. And I was thinking about like, obviously the piece is centered around Cam York, but Frost is a guy who, can fill in some of Marner's role. He's not Mitch Marner, but he does have a similar skill set. He's like a poor man's Mitch Marner.
Yeah.
And then Bobby Brink is the guy with upside. So you get like two offensive players, and then you get a defenseman, which they very much need, who will play on their top pairing.
And I think for that package too, they probably have draft picks,
Yeah, potentially. Though
second, third rounders, not a first, but
yeah, like I wouldn't. I honestly, I wouldn't pay too much for anyone right now unless they're like Leon Draisaitl or like one of these elite franchise-changing players, which maybe Marner is, but he has yet to prove to be that. And I'd just be really, it'd be really tough for me to disrupt the rebuild process for a guy that I wasn't 100% sure was going to be here for his whole career. Again, Mitch Marner's a special player, so I don't want to like downplay his value to an organization. I don't think he's coming here. I'll make that very clear. I think it's very unlikely that he gets traded to the Flyers. But I was like kind of throwing around what it would take. And it would obviously take like either a substantial deal
Well,
or an elite player back, in a swap. And it
yeah,
might be like Konechny in a second or something.
no, to your point, Yariv, like I saw something floated out by Greg Wyshynski online. He said somebody, very smart hockey person floated this to me, and I want to bring it back up after what's happening with the whole Marner situation. He said something that he heard in the past was Marner for Clayton Keller straight up, which is kind of similar to Konechny.
Right. That's
Um,
that's yeah. And actually that's what rooted up my Konechny thoughts. And Keller's a very similar player to Marner.
yeah,
Um, so that one like makes a ton of sense. And sometimes Marner just needs a change of scenery. Again,
you're the new face of the franchise in Utah if that deal went through. So
yeah, and you don't have to play in Arizona. Like they're actually going to be able to spend money.
yeah,
They're not going to start trading away everybody. Like that franchise might actually have the bones now to grow substantially. And they might end up actually being a relatively good team again. Though they weren't that bad this year. Considering all
a really
the
young team too, right?
yeah,
Like Logan
considering all the
Cooley, Dylan
yeah,
Ganther.
considering all the problems that they've had, could be worse. So you mentioned Utah. We were joking around about names earlier. I don't want to speak for you. I don't know what their name's going to be, but I do. I am interested to see how the team pans out now. Like I expect them to actually have a pretty big summer after they're going to have substantial amount of cap space. They might be the guys who go for Steven Stamkos and give him a big contract just to be like, hey, let's get a big name in here.
Yeah,
Um,
sell some season tickets,
yeah,
jerseys.
show everybody we're serious. They might
Guy who's
go for,
won multiple cups.
yeah, and again,
So
it's I don't know if players want to play in Utah, but they might. I don't know that much about Utah. I've only driven through it, so I don't. It's going to be interesting how they develop, and then. We heard rumors that there are, names kind of associated that something have to do with icebergs or, cold weather.
I have
And
some good
then,
ones. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
So
Good.
actually, Utah, they trademarked 8 names. So these are all in the
Okay.
running
So it's
potentially.
going to be one of these. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's either Utah Hockey Club, which would be hilarious, uh, Utah Mammoth, Utah Outlaws, Utah Yeti, Utah Venom, Utah Fury, Utah Ice. My personal favorite is Utah Blizzard. And just for the only reason that if the Blizzard ever take on the Avalanche, it'll be the Battle of the Snowstorms. So
Right. Yeah.
we gotta we
I
gotta
like
get
it.
Blizzard.
I,
I think for me it's Utah Blizzard or Utah Yeti are the cool
I
ones.
like Fury.
I don't mind Fury. It's
I don't
just
know what it
like
means, but I like it. Like, I don't know
coming
what your
fast and
logo would be.
furious
Yeah.
at you, but
But I kind of like it. Hockey Club is dumb.
I don't really know what even Blizzard would be like as a logo, just like a snowstorm
Yeah.
logo. Like, what would you? How would you even?
It would probably be a Yeti, which is probably why they,
Yeah,
like I imagine their logo, even if they're the Fury or something, will be
will be a
something,
Yeti or something
yeah,
like that.
like or a snow or like a snowstorm. To your
Yeah,
point.
and I think
Um,
whole thing
Blizzard's
with
cool. Blizzard and Fury I think are my favorite.
yeah, I like Blizzard. I like Yeti, Utah
You
Ice. I
could
guess
Mammoth.
Mammoth is kind of weird. I don't
It
know.
it sounds weird, but I like the idea of a woolly mammoth as a
Yeah,
logo.
that
I
makes
think I think
sense.
the logo could be really cool.
And I think the thing with Utah Hockey Club was like if they couldn't come to a decision on the other names, they would be Utah Hockey Club for their first season and
Okay.
then change it after to like one of the other names,
Yeah, it was
basically.
made pretty quickly. It would
Yeah.
be funny if we had Utah Hockey Club.
Yeah, it just reminds me of a
Just to
soccer
go from
team,
the
right?
joke of like Arizona Coyotes like not really being an NHL franchise and then the one that takes them over is just like hockey club.
Utah Hockey Club, awesome.
I think they should figure it out. I think they should just pick a name. I don't think it's that
Yeah,
hard
get
to
the
pick a
marketing
name.
part department to
Yeah.
work
You
here
want to
and
be you want to come up with a bang. That's why, you look at some of the names. It's not a great UFA pool, but there are some names that they could go out there. They could also trade for an RFA. Um, yeah. I mean, there's not like elite talent really outside of Stamkos, right?
no,
Who's
not
not
really.
really. Just Stamkos,
I
Tyler
yeah,
Bertuzzi,
I mean,
pretty much. Oh, Jonathan Marchessault.
yeah, but
He's a guy I would be
I
interested in,
expect
but
he's gonna sign in
I th
Vegas.
I don't how
I don't know, but I just somehow he's gonna sign back. I just feel
he's
like
been so good for
he
them.
was such a crucial part of their cup win. Like, are they really gonna trade him? And even too,
Tarasenko's out there.
yeah, even too, like, what if he goes off again this playoffs and like gets them to the finals, something like that? Like, they're
What
gonna let him go? I don't know.
what about
Be a tough
Vladimir
sell.
Tarasenko on a 2 year? I think he can get longer, but what about like Tarasenko on a 2 year deal? It would probably
Uh,
take 5 million plus, but
I don't know. I just think once again, it's like why bring him in? Like spend that money on Teravainen. Give me a center.
yeah, you know
Right?
what I
Like
think.
for the roster, like the way the Flyers roster set up, like why add it? I just don't see them adding any wingers in free agency
Don't you
unless it
think
would be like a Stamkos, for
don't you
example.
think it yeah, true. Don't you think it all kind of leverages now on Michkov? Like if
Well,
Michkov comes over here, the offseason plans like change
I think they changed in the sense
offensively.
that yeah, the Flyers might be open to adding more offensively, but I also
And the
think
type of players.
I also think it changes in another way too. That like we mentioned these Marner trades and trading for Natchez and doing all this other shit. Like I personally think if Michkov comes over, the Flyers don't go into that stuff because they think to themselves, "Hey, well, we have our superstar. Let's see how he does his first season. Then let's add next year."
The only thing, and I brought this up twice already, I think, like the Alex Pietrangelo thing. I'm not saying it's possible. I don't know if it's likely. I have no idea. But looking at that type of guy who's 33 years old, again, he has substantial cap hit. We brought up Vegas because, they're up against the cap like significantly. But then
Yeah,
again, they'll find ways to hide the money like they do every
and the
season.
cap's going up like
Yeah.
5 million. So
So maybe they'll keep him. I mean, he's definitely, especially depending on how they do in the playoffs. If they're out in the first round, you never know. But he is the type of player that I would be okay with investing and overpaying salary wise to be like, okay, but now my defense is Alex Pietrangelo, Travis Sanheim, Cam York, uh, maybe Risto's still here. I doubt it. If we bring in Pietrangelo, I imagine we would move Ristolainen. You have
yeah,
Sealer, you have oh my god, uh,
Drysdale.
Drysdale. Thank you. Oh my God. You have Drysdale here. Then I'm like, okay, this defense can now support whatever offense we have. And he fixes so many things, right? He obviously enhances the PK,
Well,
obviously enhances the power play, enhances breakouts. And we'll have him probably for 2 years. And then we'll have to eat that last year when he's like 36 years old. He probably won't be as good, but he is an elite defenseman. And if there's an opportunity to bring in a guy like that, I would be very interested. I would not be open to many other players of that caliber. And I was actually listening to Flyers broadcast roundtable, and they were talking about, and Brian Boucher said something that we have brought up on this podcast over and over again. People keep talking about number one defenseman, number one defenseman. We need number one. He was saying, he's like, what are there, like 10 number one defensemen in the league? That's what I've been saying for
every team
years.
needs a number one defenseman,
It's
not just
like,
the Flyers.
yeah,
So
there's also like, there's more number one centers, but there may be one to go around for every team, maybe.
yeah, close.
So, but defensemen, there are not many number one defensemen in the league.
I
So,
think I think they'll be trying to target a defenseman. I think it just depends on who's available. Like I don't know if the Flyers want to play a ton of assets for a guy who's not a true number one.
right,
Um,
that's
and
exactly.
that's the thing. Like here's something that actually I just saw on Twitter, and it's from our guy Chris Mayer. So shout out to him. But Chris was stating that he heard some rumblings on the Flyers and some things they are looking for, particularly a right-handed D can play 20 minutes a night, isn't pushing over 30, and they'll also consider a left-handed D in the same respects. Somebody in the tweet thread asked Chris a true number one or hoping we draft him at number two or number 12. And Chris said one of the names I've heard is a true number one defenseman. So, shout out to Chris for that insight. Obviously, rumors are rumors. Who knows? But like,
Yeah.
it kind of leads into our thought process that hey, like it wouldn't be surprising to see the Flyers try to target a top D man because you look at every team that's competitive in the playoffs, every team that's won the cup in the last decade, what did they all have? A number one defenseman. If you don't have a bona fide number one defenseman, it's really hard to win in the NHL playoffs, as
Yeah.
we've seen. You
That
can do it without a number one goalie. Hell, you can even do it without a bona fide number one center if you have the depth at forward to, you know, kind of account for not having that number one true offensive center. But you cannot win a cup without a real number one
yeah.
defenseman. I think that's something that's been proven time and time again in the NHL. So
Yeah. Well, I just look at the fact Vegas just brought in Hannafin on a long-term deal. They're
And
up
have
against the cap.
Theodore
They want to keep Marchessault. They have Theodore. He's the oldest of the group. I'm like,
writing on the wall type of deal,
right.
right?
Maybe there's an opportunity there to be like, hey, you'll take Ristolainen. He's going to save you half. We'll even eat, $1 million of his cap hit. So he's literally 50%. And he's not like a throwaway defenseman.
He
He's a
would play
good
in their top
defenseman.
four, yeah.
Right, exactly. At the very least, he's going to be a good bottom six defenseman on your team. He fits the mold of their defense, which is just monstrous size defensemen who are aggressive. So I don't know, just an idea. I'm sure some people would scoff at that, but all right. Just want to remind everyone, please like and subscribe. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify. Give us a ratings there as well. And if you can hit the notification bell for notifications on YouTube, and make sure you know when the episodes come out. All right, next topic we have Phantoms. Phantoms, I did not expect them to have a big first round. They absolutely played really well. I did get a chance to watch both of their games. They won their first game, where, quite frankly, the score I don't think was even in. I don't think it even indicated how well they played. They significantly outplayed Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins in that first game. When they were away, they played a really tight game. They outshot them considerably. They hit the post, I don't know, 4 times, maybe more, maybe even 5 times in that game. They played a really strong game. And then game two, they're down in that game. They end up scoring 2 goals back to back. Tanner Lazinski ends up, I believe it was Lazinski, ends up winning it in overtime. I think Emil Andre is the one who tied the game, if I remember off the top of my head. I don't have the scoreboard open. Pretty much a complete team effort. And yeah, they won both games, best of 3 series against Wilkes-Barre Scranton. Now they go to play the Hershey Bears next, who was the best team in the league. It's going to be tough. Hershey's getting a rebound and getting some players from the NHL level who are playing with Washington. It's going to be a really tough opponent, but I will say it was after the type of season that the 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 Phantoms had this year. I was really disappointed, but to see them win a playoff series was redeeming in some ways. Again, they're going to have really tough opponents, and that's consequence of barely making the playoffs. But they are better than their record, and I think the win against Wilkes-Barre Scranton already showed that. And look, they had a lot of injuries this year. Lazinski was injured a bunch. Adam Brooks was injured a bunch. They were both missed significant time. Now they got Brink back. They got Addard and Yinning back from the Flyers. So they got, they have a full lineup right now. To the point where I think Tuamala didn't even play in those games. I think they're going more veteran heavy to try to win in the playoffs. So far, so good. I'm excited about that. And also, got to give a shout out to Peterson, especially in that first game. He was very good in the first game, stopped some breakaways, was really, really solid in net. And he got himself a couple back to back wins. And I think it's really good for him, get his confidence back up. He will be here for another year, most likely. And would be nice to see him, maybe even battle for that NHL spot next year with Fedotov. I don't think he's going to get it, but we could use a better version of him next year, regardless, because there are always injuries and always need a number 3. And Kolosov is very young. So, what do you think?
Obviously, I mean, just for the Phantoms to advance here, I think it's beneficial for them. Like last year, they only, got to play in the first round, right? So just for them to be able to move on and for their younger guys to kind of get more playoff experience, obviously that's what you're looking for. I mean, I think it's not surprising to see Peterson kind of be the starter here. He's been their starter
He's the
essentially all
vet.
season. And Kolosov, if there's any injury or something like that, then you'll probably see him draw in. I doubt we're really going to see him in any other circumstance unless there's like a blowout of some situation or some sort. I think one of the main things for me in the last game that was really encouraging is a lot of the younger players you're seeing kind of step up, right? Like
Brink.
Emil Andre with a big goal. Oleg Shell with a couple of assists. Bobby Brink, with a big assist on one of Lazinski's goals as well. And then the overtime winner, obviously, just who doesn't love to see a game end in that fashion? With the overtime goal getting scored and just the fly or not the Flyers, the Phantoms being able to capitalize in overtime, not having to stretch it to that final game three. So I think it's going to be a tough test against Hershey because they've been, I believe, one of the top teams, if not the top team, in the
Yeah, they were.
AHL.
They were.
But for the Phantoms, they really have no pressure, right? Like they're playing with kind of house money here in the sense that Hershey's the top team. They're going to be expected to advance. Can the Phantoms, kind of play that underdog role and upset here and upset the Bears? I really think for the Phantoms that in a sense they're underrated almost just because they have a lot of young talent like a Brink, um, like an Andre that could, really put them over the top of the situation. And one guy, obviously, that's been doing it for them all season is Lazinski, right? Even in their biggest game in the past outing there against Wilkes-Barre, like he came through at crucial times. With setting up plays, scoring goals, especially the tying goals. So I think continue like it'll be interesting to see if he can continue that play going forward in the next series for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be interesting. And it's a really great sign from Emil Andre. He absolutely will be in the NHL mix next year. I don't know if he's going to start with the Flyers, but he will definitely be that first, barring some kind of setback. He's most likely that first call up guy
Yeah.
if he doesn't
He's
make the
gonna
team
get a
out of
long
camp.
look for sure, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's why I wasn't sure about Zamula because I'm like, where does Zamula fit in the future here? Um, and is there an opportunity to get like a draft pick for him? Because we
Yeah,
never even drafted him,
it's
and
possible.
he might be maxed out here as like what his impact will be for the Flyers. But they also could just roll him as the seventh
Yeah, I
next
just
year.
think about it. I look at Tortorella, like how many times this season did he think Zamula needed to watch the game from upstairs and get another perspective? I imagine with Andre being a young defenseman, offensively oriented, there could be times where it's a similar situation where they want to give Andre a break and they're like, let's get Zamula in, and that's the kind of the reason they bring him back. But
Yeah,
they know that hey, we can rotate these guys,
yeah,
and it's still playing younger players, letting them develop. So.
yeah, yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Z, and we'll see what happens with Andre. But it's definitely promising. We know Emil Andre and Bobby Brink will be playing roles in the NHL next year, most likely. Maybe Yinning, maybe Addard. But some of these guys will be, maybe even Tuamala. That's pretty much it from that group. I don't see anybody else really playing an NHL role there from that young core, but we'll see. There's still plenty of off season. We haven't even gotten to that point yet, and there will be changes coming, like almost guaranteed. There's no way Danny Briere will not be aggressive this off season, um, especially at the draft. I could definitely see him being aggressive at the draft. So we'll see what happens. So just want to do a quick prospect update, and this is the only one I really care about. So Barkey and Bonk. Just want to update people on the OHL playoff tracker. They are up 2-1 in the series against the Saginaw Spirit. They are, I guess, on paper, they're the number one team in the OHL just by their record. They are most likely going to be playing the Oshawa Generals, who are up 3-0 on North Bay. Um, I think the Admirals. And it should be interesting. They're up 2-1, so they still have to close out their series. They won the first two games, they lost the next one 6-2. Could blow up in their face, but they do have a lead right now. They're going to play their next game on May 1st. Tomorrow actually. Oh, I thought there was a 31st in April, and I realized it was wrong. I said something wrong in the beginning. Anyway, so they're going to be playing as this episode. A lot of you listen to this episode. They were playing that night. If they win that game, they're most likely going on to the finals. They're both doing well offensively, but Denver Barkey he's got 3 goals, 10 assists, 13 points in 11 games, a +5. He slowed down a little bit in the goal scoring department, and then Oliver Bonk has got 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points, +7 in 11 games. So not the same scoring pace he was on, but probably has to focus more on D just because of the situation. But looking forward to it. I hope they win, and I hope they go on to the
Memorial Cup.
Memorial Cup. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
That's where we really want to see them.
I would expect like they're going to be hungry for that, right? They went all the way to the finals of Memorial Cup last season and lost, so wouldn't be surprised to see them get back to that final and try to win it this time around.
Yeah, their record this year was pretty stupid.
Yeah,
Um,
they're a
fif-
disgusting team.
50-14, one overtime
They
loss,
don't lose
three
often.
shootout losses. They had 104 points. Saginaw Spirit was right there with them, which is probably why it's more competitive. They were the best two teams in the league. They were 50-16, 1-1, 102 points. And then if you look at the East, wasn't as strong. It's funny, like the best teams are both where they should be. Um, where the Oshawa Generals finished with 89 points, and North Bay Battalion finished with 87 points. So we'll see. You never know. Standings don't always matter, but there is a good chance that if they make it to that finals, that they'll come out the winner. It looks like their best opponent is now. So they just have to get through this, and there's a good chance they're going to walk into the, well, not walk, but they'll have to battle their way into the Memorial Cup, which looks like they can do. And I think that's really important for them to get in there too. We want them to stretch this out.
Yeah, get as much important games as possible under your belt, right?
Exactly. Feel the pressure. All right, let's end on some playoff talk. Obviously, there have been a lot of results so far in the playoffs. I'll read them off. We can talk about quickly. We can talk about the series, and maybe we can try to pick some Stanley Cup finalists. So Florida beat Tampa Bay 4-1, 4-1 in the win department. Tampa Bay just lost 6-1 in their elimination game. Boston and Toronto. Boston's up 3-1 on Toronto. Toronto is in their game 5 right now. Again, Toronto's without Austin Matthews in that game, so not the best. The Rangers got swept, or I'm sorry, the Washington Capitals got swept by the New York Rangers. Not that surprising, to be honest with you, considering Washington was, in my opinion, an inferior team to the Flyers and probably shouldn't have been in the playoffs. And it showed because Ovechkin didn't even have a point in that series, so that means they really got shut down. And Carolina is up on the Islanders 3-1. They were completely dominating. The Islanders did have one good game so far. They managed to win that one in overtime. I imagine Carolina will probably finish that out in 5 and then go on to play the Rangers. And then I imagine it's going to be Boston and Florida. What do you think about the East so far?
Um, it's been disappointing for me just in the sense that the series haven't been close. Like I love to watch, close playoff
I
hockey.
thought Tampa and Florida would be
I
closer.
thought that was going to be like 6, 7 games, Battle of Florida.
Yeah,
It was a weird series because a lot of the games were close
yeah.
and then either got out of hand in the third period or like were like a 1 goal type of game, and then Florida ends up winning that game essentially, or most of those games in the series. But it's not really too surprising any of the results. Like, I think it's going to be like you said. It has to be Rangers. They've won here, but it's going to definitely be Rangers Carolina. I can't.
Maple Leafs up 1-0. Sorry.
Interesting. I can't see the Islanders coming back. Leafs, yeah, as Yariv just set up 1-0. So who knows how that game's gonna shake out. But I would expect it's gonna be Florida Boston as well. I don't think the Leafs are gonna come back here. It would be fun to see them come back, but I don't think Boston is gonna choke again down 3-1 2 years in a row. But if they do, I mean, there might be a lot of big changes coming in Boston if that happens 2 years straight.
Yeah.
Would
Marner did get the primary assist on the Jake
So
Mc.
look, he's responding after all the
I like
backlash.
it. I
I
like it. I hope he does.
I hope
He's
so
a very
too.
talented
Like,
player.
yeah,
I don't
he's
like where people diminish your whole career in one moment on the bench. Sorry.
no, he's a great player, and like, hey, I would want to. You'd hope he would respond after the backlash he's getting, right? To see him come out and not respond would be a negative in that situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're probably going to see Boston versus the Rangers, or no, Boston and Florida, and then we're going to see Rangers and Carolina. Personally, I think Carolina will beat the Rangers, and I think Florida will beat Boston, and then we'll have Carolina, Florida, and then my East finalist would be Carolina.
Yeah, that was my initial thought, but with how good Florida played in that first round, I am a little just because they had the superior opponent
Yeah.
and they did a great job.
I wouldn't
But
mind Florida.
Carolina, yeah, I mean it
I
could end up being the
just
Rangers too.
It could
For
be. I just
worth,
see I don't know. I just feel bad for Carolina. Like they're always in this spot and they never get there. And I just kind of want
yeah,
to see them make it at
and
this point.
that Jake Gensel addition was
Yeah.
huge.
And their
They have a
defense is
legit top
just
line.
their defense is just stacked too.
I
Like
know.
and I look at like what you need to win. My only iffy thing is like can Anderson keep this high level? But he was lights out in that like he's been lights out so far in the first
That's
round.
the thing.
So
Rangers do have the advantage in goal. In the Boston series, if Boston, assuming Boston makes it, Boston has the advantage, kind of. Though
maybe I don't
Bobrovsky,
even know. Bobrovsky's
that's
on another
yeah.
level
Well, I was just
sometimes.
thinking they
So
have two starting goaltenders, so you can like if anybody struggles, you can rotate. But
yeah,
Bob, like you saw that save, everybody saw that save. That was like one of the best
another
saves anybody has ever
yeah.
seen.
He's in
Um,
another realm sometimes. Bobrovsky when he turns
he
it on, like we've
it's
seen
so
it
funny.
before.
He went
So
from being a playoff like choker to being the exact opposite now in the playoffs, which is, I think people need to learn from that and how
yeah,
important it is to learn from losing, to learn from these moments, how
yeah,
Marner can learn from his moment
and
too.
I think for Bobrovsky, it's like a chip on his shoulder type of thing. Like how many people are saying, "Oh, worst contract in the league. He doesn't have it anymore." Like I think it's kind of like, yeah, fuck you. Like I'm the worst contract in the league, right?
Yeah, suck it.
I definitely feel like he has a competitive nature to him, and that's probably a part of it.
Yeah.
And then let's go through the West
Yeah.
series. So right now,
Go ahead.
Dallas and Vegas are tied 2-2. That's pretty much the only like close series so far in the first round, which
Hmm.
makes sense. I mean, because I thought of that series and I'm like, wow, you're Dallas and win your division. Great. Your prize is you get to face the Stanley Cup defending champs. Like it's not
Yeah.
really too fair for Dallas. Vancouver, Nashville. Vancouver's up 3-1 in that one.
They should change the way the standings go.
I think they should go back to what it used to be,
Yeah,
one
eight
versus
play.
eight.
Yeah, yeah, I
Because then
agree.
you actually have an advantage, like it's more of an advantage, like the wild card thing. I don't know.
You get no advantage.
Yeah, it's
Florida got no advantage playing Tampa Bay.
No, definitely not. And then we have Edmonton's up 3-1 against the Kings, and then we have Colorado up 3-1 against the Jets. So, who do you think are gonna win these series, and what are the matchups for you going forward, Yariv?
Just the first two. I think Dallas will end up closing it out. I think they have the momentum. Uh, we'll see. Vegas is extremely tough. I think it'll go to seven.
I
But
agree.
I'll give the edge to Dallas right now, just because it's really hard to repeat too. As you know, as a Stanley Cup contender, a lot of times there is disappointment that comes after that, or a Stanley Cup winner. And then Colorado, I think, will finish out Winnipeg. I think they're the better team, and it shows. There was, the first game, and then Colorado's just taken over from there. So I imagine that'll probably continue. And I think Colorado will probably most likely come out of the West again, and we might have Colorado, like Florida, Colorado, Carolina, maybe at the end, Colorado Rangers. Um,
Yeah.
and did you bring up the other two?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Vancouver, Nashville,
So
Edmonton, LA?
I think Vancouver, Nashville could end up going to seven, just because Nashville is. I mean, it's surprising that they're not up 2-2. I mean, they blew that lead. They blew a 2-goal lead with what 3 minutes left, and then
Yeah.
lose in overtime. I think there is a chance that Nashville can come back. And usually, when you see games like super close like that, which was why the Florida Tampa Bay Lightning was super surprising, I think Nashville does have the chops to take it to seven, and I think they could come back. But odds are Vancouver will move on, even if Nashville takes it to seven. Just the fact that it's hard to win 3 games in a row in the playoffs against a even opponent. And then, so I'll give that nod to Vancouver. And then I think Edmonton will close out LA. They are the superior team. And I think just with that offense, they're going to be really hard to beat for any, first round team like LA, who's a good team, but they're also not like, they're going to be better next year probably than they
Yeah,
are
they're
this
still
year.
kind of developing a lot of their
Yeah.
younger guys like Byfield, I think, and
Right.
LaFerriere and all those
Yeah.
guys will get better, right?
So I think, but inevitably, like it could be Edmonton. Uh, if Edmonton has to face either Dallas, Vegas, or Colorado, I would probably give the edge to one of those three teams.
Yeah.
But you
So it
never
looks
know.
like with
Could
your
be
picks, it
Edmonton in the
would be,
finals.
yeah, it would be Edmonton, Vancouver, and then you have Dallas, Colorado. Like, who do you think would be the finalists for the West for you out of those four?
I'll take Colorado. They're too deep. They have everything. Kale McCarr
It's funny
is
because you're making the same
ridiculous.
picks as me, so it's not
Um,
even any variance.
I mean,
But it's like
we could
we have
both be
this we
wrong.
have the same thought process. So like for me going through the West series, I have Dallas getting over Vegas in seven as well. I just think now that they were down and they kind of tied it back up, like you said, they're gonna have all the momentum. And then I think Nashville will potentially upset Vancouver and come back. I think Vancouver will hold on. The only reason I say Nashville's a chance is Demko's out, DeSmith is out, and now Vancouver has Seelovs and is the third string goalie. So he played well, but like who knows how that's gonna go for
They
them,
have
right?
the Vegas advantage tonight. Not a severe advantage, but they do have the
That's
edge.
strange that they have the edge even with the third string goalie in.
Yeah.
But interesting. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think Vancouver will close it out. I think that will get to seven, though. I think Nashville will fight back, tied up 3-3. And Edmonton, I think, will close things out and get to the next round. And same with Colorado. They'll close things out in the next game as well and get to the next round. So we have the same matchups, right? Like I have Dallas and Colorado and Vancouver and Edmonton. It's crazy how one side of the bracket is like so much more stacked for the West, where you get like Dallas, Vegas, Colorado, and the other side, like the teams kind of have an easier path.
But not
But
enough. But the final four, it's going to be
yeah,
all top teams,
yeah, exactly. So
all even.
I think Colorado will beat Dallas. I think Edmonton will beat Vancouver. Then we get Colorado, Edmonton, and then for me, my final is Colorado, Carolina.
You know, I can't help but feel like it might be Florida winning the cup this year.
It's
Just
possible.
the
Who do
way
you
they
have
played
winning the
Tampa
cup?
Bay.
Florida, you think?
I had Carolina.
Okay.
I think the Rangers have had it easy so far, and that's not a great thing.
Sign, yeah.
Because you can kind of not show up as much. I mean, look, all of these teams are capable of winning the Stanley Cup. This is a really hard year to predict. Like
Yeah, there's
you
a
could
lot of
make
top teams.
yeah, you could make an argument to me most of these teams could win the Stanley
I
Cup
could even see
that will
Edmonton
make the
getting
next
there.
round.
Like if they
Right.
continue to play the way
Yes.
they're playing. So
The only thing with Edmonton is if you manage to shut down their offense,
yeah,
they can't play a tight game like Vegas or Colorado or Dallas. But a Colorado Edmonton series,
would be very
that
fun.
just
McKinnon
run and
versus
gun,
McDavid. Yeah.
dude. Run and gun, dude. And it's like Draisaitl versus McCarr, and it's just like, it's just elite.
Rantanen and you have all of them
Zach
involved.
Hyman,
Yeah, exactly.
who's turned into a 50 goal scorer all of a sudden. Um, yeah, no, I mean, I don't think Edmonton is the strongest of that group, and neither is Vancouver. I mean, my opinion, it's the best teams are Colorado, Vegas, and Dallas.
Yeah. And
Especially with
Florida,
Vegas being healthy. Yeah, and Florida, Rangers, and
Carolina.
Hurricanes. But it would be funny if the Bruins win.
It would be, yeah. So was that your pick? Florida's your pick for the cup, Yariv?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with Florida.
All right. I have Colorado, Carolina my final. I'm gonna go Colorado. I think McKinnon's getting another cup. I mean, they look real good to me.
I
So
think it's gonna be, yeah. You can
it's
argue
gonna be tough. We'll
it's
see.
hard, man, because Kale McCarr is so good and
Yeah,
McKinnon is so good.
I think for Colorado, their downfall in the end could be Georgiev. That might be what
Right.
gets them. But so far, I mean, it hasn't seemed to plague them. He's outplaying Hellebuyck somehow.
And
So
Bob is playing like phenomenal hockey, and Shesterkin's been playing well, but he
Florida,
hasn't
Colorado
had
would
to
be
play as
fun
well.
too. Like I picked Carolina, Colorado, which would be fun. But even that,
It could be the
Colorado
Rangers, dude, and that's
would
the
be
thing.
fun.
It could be the Rangers.
I
It's
hope
this
it's
year
not
is
the
so
Rangers,
hard.
but it
I
could be
know.
them.
If ideally if I had to give it to any team, I'd pick the West just to I don't want any of the
Yeah. Hope.
teams to
Hey, you know what? Hopefully for
or
Steve, it's the
Carolina.
Rangers.
Right, yeah, for Steve.
Exactly. He'll
For
be very
Steve.
excited if it's the Rangers.
Um Look, I mean, all the teams that would win this year deserve it. I'll say that. Like there are none of these teams are jokers. Like there's
Yeah, we were
nobody.
like, hey, like, how did this team gonna go on this Cinderella run and make it?
Yeah. And that's why I don't think look, if Toronto takes it to 7 and still loses they can be upset, but there's really nothing to be upset about. You're dealing with all legitimate teams. It's not like you are losing to the Capitals or to the
Yeah, like the
Islanders.
Bruins are one of the top teams,
You,
exactly.
you know what I mean? Like you're losing to a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. So it's not that bad. I think it's bad in the way they've lost so far. Um, but it's not that bad. They don't necessarily have like they have the off like that's why Toronto reminds me of Edmonton. Like
Yeah,
they seem like
definitely.
they're kind of similar. Like you have the high end guys, you can outscore teams, but when it comes to play like really tight defense, you're probably going to lose those games.
Yeah, which they just don't have the horses to contend in those types of games, right?
On the back
Unfortunately.
end, they don't. I mean, they have good defensemen, but they don't have like they don't
They
have
don't
that
have that
number
bona
one.
fide number one shutdown guy. Like I'd argue
And
Riley's a good number two.
and you look at Colorado's top pairing, you could make a case that it's the best top pairing in the league,
Yeah, you can make a
right?
case that
Taves and
Taves is better than any defenseman on the Leafs, and obviously Makar is. So you know what I mean? So
I think it's safe to say Makar is the best defenseman in the NHL right now.
yeah, I
Outside of
don't.
Victor Hedman is the only other person I could think of.
Yeah, it's pretty safe.
I
It's
don't,
a
I
pretty
don't,
safe assumption.
I don't know who else. I mean, Adam Fox is up there obviously too. Quinn Hughes,
Petrangelo and Hughes
Petrangelo,
and
but he's like older. Like
yeah.
Makar's, like he's not even in his
I
prime
think
yet.
Darlene is like the other. Obviously
Yeah,
Buffalo's done nothing, but I'm just saying from like an
yeah.
offensive standpoint, that's like the next,
They
young and
will.
up and coming defenseman for
They
sure.
if they're not good next year, they should shoot somebody.
If they're not good next year, they just gotta have to trade everybody again, I guess, and see what happens. I don't
No, they
know.
got to build
That's
on that D.
yeah, for sure. It's crazy. I still can't
They
believe they
should trade
didn't.
for Mitch Marner.
I still can't believe they didn't make the playoffs.
They should trade for Mitch Marner.
Oh, maybe, but I just don't think the Leafs will do that because it's in division. So
Yeah, but they have the assets, and they can keep their defensemen like pretty much intact. Like, or at
yeah.
least you could, like, what do you think they would do? Like an Owen Power for Marner?
Owen, it probably have to be power and like a little more maybe, but I could see it. Yeah. Owen Power. I mean, imagine they. I don't think Buffalo would
I
do
don't
this,
know.
but
He's a first overall
flip
pick.
flip Byram for Marner. Try to.
I think they'd want to keep Byram.
Yeah,
I think we
probably
would
if they
have taken
traded for
Byram
him.
over Drysdale if he was available.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. All right, dude. This was a great episode. We went about 2 hours,
That's okay.
and Michkov took about 25% of that. So, but I'm
Hey,
cool with it.
everybody wants to hear about Michkov, so I'm
That's
glad we
all
got to
I want to
talk.
talk about.
I'm glad we got to talk a lot about him. That was a fun one for sure.
God, I fucking hope he's coming over here. I'm sorry to curse, but
We're gonna see you end of June, so we
praise
got our
praise the
calendars
hockey
marked, right?
gods. Yeah. Yeah, dude. People are like, everybody's gonna have those
Draft
dates.
and Michkov, they're two things coming up that are
I
gonna be
mean,
huge for the
I'll tell
Flyers.
you,
So,
man, if he comes over here, like it will be like the Flyers will be the talk of the town again, like
oh, of
overnight.
course. I mean, it's like I said
It's gonna be
earlier, like
huge for the
when we were
franchise.
talking offline, it's gonna be their biggest addition since Pronger if they
Yeah.
can bring him over. So
Biggest offensive addition since
Lindros, like basically,
I can't think of anybody else because like we didn't know Jake Voracek was gonna be
you
what he
didn't know
was,
Giroux was gonna be that so
right?
either.
When you
So
drafted him, you knew he was going to be great when they went to the Stanley Cup Finals. At that point, when you saw him play, you're like, oh, okay, he's a legitimate
yeah,
superstar.
but there wasn't the same like hype
Right.
before that point, right?
This is like
Uh,
literally we've
this
never had
is
this.
yeah, I don't think there's been a hype prospect to this extent. I mean, you could say probably Lindros, and then I would say Patrick was hyped in the sense that he was number two overall, but he
Yeah.
never had the same pedigree as Michkov,
Right.
obviously.
Right. I think he's still, if he didn't have the injury woes, I still think he would have been a top six forward in the league.
Yeah, I
But
agree with that. What can you
good
do?
luck. Good luck, Nolan Patrick. At least you weren't Cutter Gauthier to us. For all the hate he got, you would think he behaved like Cutter Gauthier.
Yeah, no, it did not.
Um, all right, dude. Anything you want to leave our audience with?
No, just we're gonna keep bringing episodes every week, and as Flyers news comes out, I'll have some articles up on flyersnittygritty.com. I'm gonna do some deep dives into the draft prospects and stuff, so I'll have some player profiles up as we get closer to the draft. So it'll be fun.
Sounds great, dude. Thank you again for coming on, man. Really appreciate you. I love this episode. This was a really fun episode. I couldn't wait to talk about
Oh,
Mitchkov.
I was so excited today
Yeah, all
to
day we were just
record.
like, um, All right. Yeah. Just want to remind everybody, please like, subscribe. Again, the best way to support us is to subscribe to this YouTube channel. So if you're listening and you haven't, please do that. It would be awesome. And also follow us on iTunes and Spotify. Give us a ratings there if you can. Hit the notification bell for notifications. All that stuff is tremendously helpful, but definitely ratings on the audio and subscription on the video. It's literally the end all be all to us. So thank you. And the comments and all that. We read the comments. Can't even keep up with them anymore like we used to. I've given up. You guys are
I
commenting,
still
but
try to respond, but
yeah, people are having conversations in there. So have at it. I'm reading them.
yeah, me too. I'm
I
keeping up with
I
them.
got to start responding to more of them. So don't think I'm not seeing your guys' comments. And again, shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Again, they'll be open May 1st. Go get yourself a cheesesteak from for their grand reopening. You will have them for the summer. So if you're in the city, make sure to check them out. They will be open tomorrow. Or I guess as you're listening to this today when it comes out. Yeah, Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Challenge your insurance company, audit them. I don't know. Figure it out. I'm not good at ad reads. Again, thank you, everybody. We love you guys. You're amazing. Keep listening. Keep supporting. You guys are awesome. And remember, always stay